Please read the instructions. No, it's not. So if anyone sees anyone nude, please let me know and I will remove them. Okay. If you want to say anything, please do a chat down the side. I'm just going to unmute Poppy and I'm just going to unmute Jerry. If that's all right. There you go. You should be able to unmute yourselves now. There we go. Welcome everyone. I'm just going to give everyone a few minutes to come in. If you want to say anything, please put it in the chat down the side. If I just put hi along here, you can all see where we all are. So it's hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, and hi to David, and welcome back from what sounds like a fantastic adventure.
Oh yeah, David's here.
David Cosmic has just come back, Mobile Studio has just come back from being somewhere very exotic and luxurious and had an incredible experience with a group of people, which I'm sure he will eventually write about and share and talk about, which will be worth a read. Very good. Okay, so Roy, good evening. Hope you all survived the storm last night. My power's cut out twice already today, so fuck knows what's going to happen if it carries on. A little bit nervous, but we'll see. Greetings from Cornwall. Hello, Jim and the girls. Nice to see you. Hi, everyone from Sylvanian Little. Stephen, nice to see you again, Deb. We met in Norway a few weeks ago. Ah, hello. Nice to see you again. I remember. I'm just going to give people a few more minutes to come in. Hello, Explorer. Good to be here. Thank you very much. Glad to have you. We'll just see who else turns up because today's a bit more of an unusual one. We're doing the whole... we're just going to
Q&A, aren't we?
Come up doing a Q&A with a burning question, and they're always interesting. This is what I do every time when I do lamb, and Poppy's done lambs as well. Is it Essek or Essek? I want to get that right. Oh, hello from Norwich, first time on one of these, so looking forward to it. Thank you. I hope we don't disappoint. But it's quite interesting to do these. Honestly, Roy, I can't tell you. You say it's lucky man to go to Norway. They invited me, Essek, thank you. They invited me over to go and talk at their kink conference. And what a gorgeous bunch of people. Kind, generous, sweet, caring, loving, giving, really interested in everything that was said, like completely open-minded. I really loved going. And if they asked me back, I'll be going again. They said they would probably, but I would, without a shadow of a doubt, go back. Much like us, then. Yeah. Yeah. No comments. We're from all over. What are you talking about? We're lovely people. Hi, from Tits. Our first one I've made live in a while. Glad to see you. And Roy laughed at Jerry, much like us then. I have had one question already written to me, and the person said, I wasn't planning to ask this question. So let me just go through some rules actually, because I'm forgetting, aren't I, for a minute. No nudity. Somebody just said to me, can I be nude in here? No, read the instructions. It's so clear. No nudity. This isn't an exhibition space. This isn't a space for you to talk to somebody else. This isn't a space for you to chat. This is a space for all of us to share some knowledge and to learn in and to see where we go. Nothing else. I do the nude workshop after. If only, eh? You can do that at Lamb sometime. I'm sure we could lock someone in a basement and make them all nude somewhere or something. But no, and it's so clearly stated. So please don't comment on what anybody else looks like or what anybody is going through or thinking or what you think about them in any way, shape or form. Please respect the other people in the room. I will read out anything that you write down the side and we will answer questions that you have in any way, shape or form. These are recorded. This is being recorded and it goes up on FetLife and it goes live on YouTube and it also stays on YouTube afterwards as well, and that's all linked. So you can have a look at whatever. So the first question that I've already had actually that was written to me was, I wasn't planning to ask this question until I saw your invitation to ask burning questions in tonight's workshop. But I thought if you give an answer that's not just specific to me, it might benefit other people struggling with different emotional issues too. As I've mentioned before, I've always experienced feelings of compersion. Does everybody know what compersion is? Does anybody not know what compersion is? That's probably a better question, isn't it? So compersion is getting joy from someone else's joy, really, is a really basic way of saying it, or from feeling good. How else would you describe it, Poppy?
I always say vicarious pleasure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I suppose it's, you know, it's joy on the behalf of, isn't it? You know.
Yeah. So like I'm a cuck queen, quite fundamentally, and I really get joy from knowing that my partner's been with somebody else and had a really great time. Don't get me wrong, it's mixed with jealousy and it's mixed with all sorts of different things that I all turn my head on and work really well for me. But there's a real feeling of compersion in there as well, of somebody I love and care for having a really great time with somebody else. And then that gives me a form of pleasure, because I love the fact that they're happy too. So I've always experienced feelings of compersion, but on the downside, I also experience an over-empathic response. So some people will say that they're empaths, which means how would you describe that, Poppy? I'm not going to do all the talking.
I think ultimately it's the experience of emotion, isn't it? So to be able to read another person's emotions, quite often empathy we say is to intuit. So we're very good at recognising how somebody may feel. But really a lot of it is about pattern recognition ultimately, in terms of behaviour. So it's quite interesting. Lots of people will say that empathy is pattern recognition and it can be learnt. Some people will say that it is ultimately being in tune and attuned to somebody else's emotional state and to be able to read that. So there's a few different theories on what it actually is, but there you go.
Yeah, for me, it is a mixture of those things, but I mainly think it is quite a learnt thing. And I think the more traumatic household you come from, or the more aware you have to be of someone else's emotions, the better you are at picking up on them. So certainly if you've gone through stuff, you become quite cautious and quite clever at reading patterns, as you say, or looking at what somebody else is doing and feeling their feelings. I also think some people leak emotions, something chronic. So you can be sitting with someone sometimes and you just feel everything that they're feeling because they throw it out because they're not dealing with it themselves. And it's quite hard not to be empathic around those sorts of people because you will feel their feelings. So, and at the moment, what this person has said, they're very heartbroken. 4 people and children around the world going through unimaginable pain and suffering. It frequently moves me to tears. My go-to escape from the real world has always been amateur dramatics and kink, but they control, but I can't kind of deal with it. What would you say are some good coping mechanisms? That's an American client phoning me in the middle of nowhere for no reason whatsoever at completely the wrong time. It's clearly a butt dial, but hey, sorry. So what would you say are some good coping mechanisms for human beings to actually be able to manage?
I mean, ultimately, it's the experience of vicarious trauma, isn't it? Is what we're talking about, and it's really difficult to avoid that at the moment. I am a huge fan of avoidance, so I will bracket when I have exposure to things. So I will try and feel in control of it, so I'm not caught off guard. I will perhaps watch the news and keep up with current affairs once a week. I think we had this very similar questions actually around COVID time, didn't we? I think it's very, very easy to become absorbed in, mindlessly scrolling, looking at things, to get over-invested, over-involved, when things start having an impact on our day-to-day life and how we function, how we parent, how we work. So for me, I will, do things like I will not allow myself to read things or have exposure to things during working hours or when I've got family time. I will very much say, okay, I'm going to listen to the news, but I'm going to listen to it once a week. I might catch a 10 o'clock news. I think it's about feeling in control of a situation that very much feels outside of our control, and it's about taking that power back. It's very different to being naive and ignorant to what's going on in the world, but some people, there was a period of time, certainly through COVID, where I was quite out of touch because I chose to be so, and it felt like it was too much. But I think ultimately as well, it's about, for me, having that compassion for other people has to go hand in hand with having that compassion for yourself. And if you recognize that this is something that you're really struggling with and you are overwhelmed by it, you're having a reaction, quite often people are driven to do things. So we look at so many initiatives, so many projects, food banks, community support, social prescribing, as I would call them, but basically human beings being good to one another is what it boils down to, that were born of COVID. And I think there's still a lot of them still exist. And you see this when there's any great adversity in the world, when people are fleeing fleeing from one country to the next, or there's war, you see an abundance of people coming together because that drive responses activate us in us as human beings quite often to do something positive, to do something creative. So I think there is some real, going back to what you said about compersion, really slightly different, but I think there is something in that idea of contributing and being able to do something, but it has to be something that feels very, very considered and very mindful. So I think that's a really good way of handling the situation as well. But I think it is about recognizing that compassion is a two-way street, and unfortunately, quite often we get in a situation where we give more than we can, have to give. And I think it's about recognizing capacity as well, because there's times when I have huge amounts of capacity to be able to support and to give and to do all of these things that we're advocating for, but it is also about recognizing when you need to pull back. And I would, as if I was, this is not therapy, but if this was therapy, I would be questioning why you're posing that question now, and in actual fact, are you getting near to your personal limitation in terms of what you can give and what you can be exposed to and what you can volunteer. And I would be, looking at what needs to happen accordingly because of that. Does that make sense, Deb? Over to you.
No, it makes perfect sense. And the things I would add around that is, if you are going to watch the news, check your news channels. One thing you can say about some news channels is that they select what they show, whereas actually what you've got happening at the moment is TikToks showing beheaded children and horrific scenes. And pictures, and that is inappropriate. And please, if you have children, watch your children's access. That's not something anybody needs to see. We're reading about it, we know about it, we do not need to see it. There is a difference. So pick your news channels. Talk to friends, talk to people, however, watch the people you talk to. Because if you're feeling sympathetic to one side, whether we're talking about Ukraine and Russia, whether we're talking about Israel and Palestine and Hamas, whoever we're talking about, have compassion and care for everybody in all of it, because actually so many people are being hurt everywhere and we're seeing that. So pick the people you talk to, because it's really healthy to talk. It's a good idea. It's really healthy to look at reputable sites. Now, I know TikTok is reputable, but something like the BBC or something, if you're in the UK, pick your sources. It's really important. And I would certainly, like Poppy, only ever choose certain times to have a look. So I was dealing with a client the other day who said, and one of her friends phoned her and told her something really traumatic and asked her about her. She then didn't sleep all night. It's also about boundaries. What are you willing to hear and not willing to hear, and what time you're willing to hear those things? It's really important that we learn to cope with the timing of hearing things. And if you don't have someone to unburden to or to share with, and somebody dumps something on you, because we are being trauma dumped all the time, really, in our own ways. And Poppy mentioned vicarious trauma. So watch your breathing when you're reading and watching all of this, because what you'll find is you're probably hyperventilating on some level or holding your breath. Breathe out, cough, or just go, oof. I think smoking is the best thing anyone can do at this moment in time without the fucking cigarette. So what smoking does, it gives you a legal or acceptable reason to leave a room, to go out, to take a time out, to be able to breathe and say, oh, that's quite heavy. But it also allows you to very weirdly play with your fingers, which is really good for you. So the other thing that goes with that, and I'll come back to smoking in a minute, is get creative. Go and do something that's really good for you. So I've got an elephant rocking chair thing at the moment that I'm turning into a spaceman thing for, and I'm also making a grotto, and I'm also getting a lot of stuff together for Poppy's and my event that we're just starting for littles. And when I get creative, I feel more empowered and I feel better about life. Find a hobby that works. If it relies on other people, like kink often, unless you're doing self-tying or different things, that can help you. If you have people that comfort you, ask them to send you something. I said this during COVID. If you have someone you love and you're not seeing them enough at the moment, get them to send you a t-shirt with their smells on. Get them to send you a piece of their clothing or something they love, so you feel more comforted when somebody isn't around and you can't get to them all the time. And giving is really good for our soul. So get out and give, as Poppy said. Go and volunteer. Give something towards anything that you feel strongly about. I am so not going to go down on sides here. So whether you want to support any of those countries and peoples that I've just mentioned, go and give something that you want to give, whether it's money, but a lot of us can't afford money, whether it's clothing, whether it's sending food, anything that you can do. We feel good when we do something. And if you can't do it for those people, go and do it for somebody else locally. Get to a soup kitchen, go and volunteer, go and do something. Give blood, for fuck's sake. Just do something that helps you, because there isn't.
You give as well. Sorry, but I think bracket what you give. So set a goal, set an aspiration, set something that you want to do, because I think in situations like this, it often feels like there's not enough. We could never give enough. We can never, some of the atrocities, frankly, that you're talking about here, and again, it applies to COVID. There will never be enough. There will never be a resolution. There will never be. So I think you have to be really clear in terms of what the objective is. So again, what I'm going to give blood. I'm going to do this thing, and hopefully I'm going to feel better about it. And just be really, really clear. And again, what Debs is saying, it made me smile a little bit, because I got an email today, true story. They're covering, and they do every year. I had this with my eldest child, but they're covering this topic in school. And one of the things that they do is look at the boy in the striped pajamas, and they send a consent out to say, we're going to be reading this as a class subject. And they this time they said, we appreciate this topic is perhaps more sensitive than it's ever been before. And it ties back to what we're saying about the medium of information that we receive. So when my eldest child was covering this topic, the school thought I was absolutely balmy, because I said, I'm fine for my child to be involved in the reading of this text. I have no problem with that. I really think it's a fabulous school, but they're in year 6. They're quite young, and my eldest child's got some issues that make him a little bit more emotionally sensitive. And I said, but I do not want them watching the video. It's a 12+, and they sent a consent form home, and they said, are you all right for this child to watch this video of this program? And I was like, no, absolutely not. And there is a huge difference between watching that film, which I'm sure most of us have seen, and reading the text, and that text been explored in a really sensible way in school. And I explained what I perceived the differences to be, and why I was all right with one and not the other, and they were fine with that. And now I'm probably going to make the same decision with the youngest child. But I think what we're saying is there is a real difference. We can be aware of what's going on. We can be educated. We can be informed. We can be sensitive and empathic human beings. But how we receive that information really, really matters. Exactly as you were saying about TikTok, and how we give, really be very measured, very considered in terms of what it is that we're going to give. And I always think if you are giving something to somebody else, again, it's about balance and that compassion. If I'm going to do this and it's giving of my time, what's my reward for that going to be? And it actually is quite transactional, but I don't think that's a bad thing always. Once I've done this thing, I deserve that spa day, or I deserve that. And I think it's always trying to balance that out.
And if with that, we're talking about limiting what you do, also limit how much you see or look at. We tend to feel flooded with emotions, and that transitionary period of when we're really struggling is around 20 minutes. So your max exposure daily should actually be less than 20 minutes if you can. Not everybody will do that because they really want to look at everything, and I really understand that. However, so what I've just done as well, I've just linked, I was looking on FetLife, that is an article, yes, written by me, because of course I'm only going to fucking publicise, I'm only going to publicise myself, aren't I? But no, there are really other good things out there. That was taking the piss out of myself. It's fuck, they're having a panic attack, now what? The basics in there are the same. Hydrate, drink, eat, sleep. You have this really interesting system in your brain called the glymphatic system. You've got glials in your brain where, if you've ever seen the film Inside Out, there is a synopsis of what this system does, where joy and sadness are in the brain, and you see this little hoover going cleaning up, and everything means something in that film. If you know about neuroscience, it's so amazing. But that kind of signifies glials. It's very simplified, but basically they clean our brain, and they only start cleaning our brain when we get 7 hours of sleep. So anybody who's sleeping under 7 hours doesn't wake up with a clean brain. Wash your brain, go to sleep for at least 7 hours. It's really important that we learn to do that if we can. I understand that there are pressures and reasons and neurodiversity and all sorts of things that impact us, and disabilities and pain. I don't think I've had 7 hours sleep for a week, and I'm having my stitches out tomorrow. I don't think I'll have another 7 hours then. But on average, if you can get to sleep, it's a really good idea. So what is an appropriate response to this? I think, again, using logic, trying to make sure that when we talk about dialectical behavioural therapy, we're using our wise mind, not our emotional, not purely our logical, but what can I do for myself here? What could calm me? Do I need to breathe? Do I need to take a warm bath? Do I need to escape? Do I need to read something completely fantasy-like or watch a film that I love? The norepinephrine, the epinephrine that comes with fight, flight, freeze, friend, fuck, flop, faux, fawn responses is overwhelming, and there are lots and lots of physical symptoms. So what can I do in that moment to help calm myself is really important, because if we don't, we change our carbon dioxide, we change our pH levels, we get nausea, we get butterflies, we impact every single thing about our bodies, and that's really bad for us. The vasoconstriction just with adrenaline alone, less blood flow to the brain, less blood flow to the heart. All of this is really important shit. So,
and I think talking about propriety as well, you talked about an appropriate reaction, and I think that's the thing sometimes that we miss. So, you know, if we have inadvertently stumbled across something quite traumatic, you know, we're watching these videos or having these exposures to things, you know, quite often I will have a conversation with someone and they'll say, oh my goodness, I'm fucked, I'm re-experiencing something. I watched this and I can't get it out of my mind. I'm sleeping about it, I'm thinking about it. And the reality is, if you have been exposed to something traumatic, and that might just be watching something or being overexposed to something on the news or whatever that might be. I remember, you know, for me, the first time I had an experience of that from outside things, I was quite young, and it was the James Bulger case, and that was really, really traumatic. I remember it sticking with me, and we're all been exposed to things like that quite regularly at the moment, depending on where we're looking. And the reality is that's supposed to stick with us. So, you know, we are supposed to spend 4 to 6 weeks processing that trauma. If we have re-experiences and symptoms of having dreams, having nightmares, having a flashback, thinking about, oh my God, I read that article, I can't get it out of my brain. We are, all of that stuff, we're thinking, oh my goodness, you know, what's wrong with me? But in actual fact, I think it's about recognizing that's a normal human behavior. That means that you are a normal, empathic, compassionate, functioning, working human being who is having a response to this, and that is okay. And I think it is normalizing that reaction. And even if you're having nightmares, even if you're having dreams and experiences, we wouldn't really consider that a problem until 6 weeks after. And a lot of people don't realize that, they don't recognize that. They think, oh my God, fuck, I had this nightmare, or I'm having this nightmare for a couple of weeks, there's something wrong with me. So I do think there is something about normalizing that as well.
We make it so normal to expect people to look at really horrific things. There was quite a few years ago, a lot of computer games were looked into as to their propriety for under 18s, because people were saying, my kid plays this and they're fine. No, they're not. They are having a traumatic response. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean they're not having it. It's really an issue. So it's really important that we learn to understand that trauma doesn't show always. It doesn't show on our faces, and processing it is really important. Grief in itself can take up to 2 years for us to go through, plus even more time. So, and as Poppy says, to actually process the initial trauma takes a long time for us to do. But we live in an instant society. Sorry, what pill do I need to take to stop that now? How do I get back to work? The latest DSM manual, the Diagnostic Statisticians Manual, DSM-5, what's quite interesting is that they're often in there is a piece about grief in the UK that actually talks about how much time someone should take off work for grief, and they recommend 2 fucking weeks. No, absolutely not. It takes a shit ton of time, at least 2 years, just to get breaks from habits and bits and pieces. People are asking, people's asked a question. What happens if you regularly do not get enough sleep? Is it true that insomnia can be triggered by unprocessed trauma? Not getting enough sleep is not good for you. However, resting is really good for you. Finding ways of doing that. So it might be that you rest in different circumstances. There might be reasons, like if you have insomnia or something else, I really do believe in getting some kind of help, going to see somebody, trying to do something. It's important that we do that. However, it's not as easy as it sounds. How else do we do that? So flotation tanks can really work for people. I'm sure Cosmic right now would probably turn and say, go abroad, take some very serious drugs and have a great time in a tribe. Like, so we all process and do things very differently. And that's important that we find our way to do that. Processing trauma is in making sense of what happened. Processing trauma is letting it work through your system. So when we experience a trauma, what normally happens, if this is a mind filter, this is not technically or biologically correct, but go with the imagery of it. It's a metaphor. So what we need to do to process a trauma is often when we don't, is that it sits on top of this filter. When we have a normal memory, it goes through a filter, it comes down, depends what memory metaphor you like or use. I like the car park method. There are 7 spaces. You can make a few more out of 1 space. And we process memory into short-term, long-term, and just different pockets in different ways. With trauma, if we don't let that process and go through, if we don't connect with what happened, if we don't talk through what happened, and talking is not always the best therapy, by the way, especially immediately. And I would also check that your therapist, if you have one, is actually properly trauma trained, because most people are not. Most people are not trauma trained at all. It's a very different experience, and I'm sure Poppy agrees with me on that. But so it's about working through what happened. It's not about making sense of it, because how can you? Sometimes it's really hard to make sense. What else would you say, Poppy?
I mean, there's almost two separate questions here, isn't there? There's trauma and the process and the trauma, and that could be a 2-hour workshop all by itself, let's be very honest. And I think ultimately, you know, as we're talking about, it is about quite often it is about exposure to and graded exposure and working through that, and as you've said, I use a filing cabinet, but it's the same as a car park, you know, exactly, it's the same principle. So refiling and processing that trauma, and again, that should be done by, you know, CBT for trauma or EMDR is very popular at the moment, but it is a targeted intervention. And I think ultimately as well, one of the key things with trauma is whether we're talking about a single one incident episode of trauma, which can be very, very different and can actually be worked through quite quickly and quite effectively, or whether we're talking about multiple stacked and complex traumas, which is a completely different ballpark. So ultimately, that type of trauma definitely we do know interferes with our ability to be able to sleep. But what tends to happen again, though, is it's habitual. So we will be trying to avoid re-experiencing perhaps nightmares, perhaps something that is going on as a consequence of trauma in layman's terms, and then that sets us up into poor cycles of behavior. But yeah, I mean, ultimately sleep does far more than just prevents us from being able to process trauma, and not having, you know, sufficient sleep is, you know, actual fact up there with one of the most damaging. You know, it takes years off your life expectancy, it prevents you from healing, it makes you more susceptible to, you know, everything, including cancer, which I think is amazing. You know, sleep is so vitally important, you know, and its relationship with trauma is there. But yeah, I would say that's probably the least of your problems if you are continually and pervasively not having enough sleep. That in itself, I think, is cause to investigate the why. You know, what's the why behind the sleep, and there's lots and lots of things like Sleepio, which I'm a huge big fan of, which is just spelled sleep with an IO on the end, and that's a really good guided CBT program for sleep. And lots of us here are fans of melatonin, which is, you know, an actual fact prescription only drug in the UK.
You can't buy in the UK. You know, someone who goes to America,
yeah,
they can bring it back in this.
Yeah, so it's prescription only in the UK, but it's actually one of the substances that is not illegal to possess and to take without a prescription. So it's actually quite a safe drug, and it can be cheaply obtained. You still need to do your research. You know, I'm certainly not going to say anything that I shouldn't say, but it's not illegal in the truest sense, but it is prescription only. However, it's a hormone, you know, and it can be really, really good and aid in sleep. But quite often when it comes to sleep, it is about breaking the cycle of, and again, CBT can be really effective, melatonin can be really effective, there's lots of things that can be really effective. But I think what we've got, oh, that's you, Deb, emotional resilience techniques.
Yeah, so what I've got there is just some DBT techniques that people can have a look at, have a read of if you are struggling. I do have a writing. I'm going to struggle to find it because it's quite far back. And it's all about sleep, how to get sleep, what to do, especially during COVID at that time. So I wrote an all I know about getting to sleep, like having a slightly colder room, having warmer feet, turning your screens off blue screens to orange. Is there any causation between ADHD and insomnia? Yes.
End of talk.
Yeah, it's not a history, because it's also no for some, but on average, yes, because what you've got is intrusive thoughts, lots of things happening in your head. You might be taking some form of amphetamine for your ADHD, which means that you won't necessarily sleep depending on what you took and when you took it. There's a lot of things because ADHD changes your brain, and it also depends what form of ADHD you've got as to the form of waking up or keeping you up that it will actually do to you. So you can get two forms of ADHD and you can get combined. And it's all about attention deficit or hyperactivity. I have combined ADHD. Poppy, you have ADHD as well, don't you? Is yours combined or what have you got?
Combined, yeah.
Right, yeah. So two. Oh my God, Jerry, thank you. Sleep in a pandemic. I should rename it, really. I should just call it sleep. But that's my article on sleeping and how to sleep better. So ADHD is also about habits and patterns, especially if you're nervous or worried about things and not sorting things, the anxiety that comes from it, the need to be busy and the dopamine hit. And there is no dopamine in sleep, but there is healing and restoration. So the answer is yes, there is causation between ADHD and insomnia for sure. However, what you will find is not everybody gets it all the time. I mean, if you want something done, unless the person is in some form of ADHD paralysis or procrastination, which they can do, and we can all suffer from. My God, if you want something done, ask someone with ADHD if they're passionate about it, because it will get done. What do I mean by combined? So that's both forms of ADHD. So whether ADHD tests are based on little boys running around really fast, so that's so facetious and it doesn't really cover it at all, but it shows my feelings about it. We're talking about ADHD at the moment, how trendy it is, how many women have it all of a sudden, but they've been fine all of their lives. Again, that makes me really cross. So, as I say, you can get two forms of ADHD, and the combined means you get both. Double whammy. Would you say that sleep and ADHD or insomnia and ADHD are connected too?
Absolutely. So obviously, you know, ultimately, I think sleep and ADHD, the difficulties with sleep is one of the key diagnostic criteria for ADHD, essentially. And unfortunately, the treatment for ADHD tends to cause further insomnia. It's this wonderful cycle of which people are wrapped upon. I think, though, quite often, people with ADHD tend as a whole to require less sleep. So I think people with neurodiversity, so there's that, you know, famous, not that I'm a fan of her, but there's a famous quote that Margaret Thatcher never slept more than 4.5 hours a night for her whole life. And she clearly was on the spectrum of some kind of, you know, some area of. And the reality is that you probably do require less sleep if you are neurodivergent. But everybody should probably have about 6 to 7 hours solid, good, you know, sleep at night is what we're saying. A lot of it is about that stimulation, isn't it? It's about ultimately being able to switch off, being able to turn off. Again, we were talking a little bit earlier on about sort of trauma, and a lot of that is to do with exposure, and sort of the treatment for that is about re-scripting and to be able to look at nightmares and to be able to, you know, switch off in a very different way. Whereas I think ADHD tends to be ultimately just that inability to unwind. So the kind of the patterns that you have round about bedtime are really, really important. So again, it's about recognizing that, you know, how are you winding down? What does that look like? Having some kind of, you know, the basics in terms of making sure what time you're eating, make sure that you have some exercise. You know, for a lot of people, when they have ADHD, a lot of the activity isn't necessarily physical activity a lot of the time. Sometimes it is, but a lot of it is not physical activity. And you can feel like you've been on the go, but in actual fact, your mind might be exhausted and your body is not, or your body is not exhausted. And about how do you wind those things down together and in unison with one another. So it is those simple things of making sure that, you know, you're eating at the right time, that you have a process in terms of winding down and going to bed. And again, it's about what you have exposure to. So again, it's the obvious one, but I think a lot of us are very reliant upon screen time, particularly in the environment that we live in. You know, I think COVID has made us more social and more able to socialize via the medium of the internet. But I think as a subculture and as a community, you know, BDSMers, Kingsters, you know, us lot, essentially, I think we have been using IT and, you know, the internet as a means of being able to connect, to socialize and to talk and to communicate, even pre all of that, you know, before things went onto the internet. But it's about recognizing, again, it's about having those boundaries. You know, when do we switch off? When do we communicate? When do we talk? How do we do that? You know, are we, and again, I'm guilty of that. I'm checking a Discord server and it's 1 o'clock in the morning. You know, why are we doing that? But again, it's about
you as well, though. That's
it.
It's all part of it, isn't it? And make your bedroom just for sleeping or just for sex. don't do work in it. Don't make it the place that you go to think about all your worries and your woes.
And how you get that dopamine as well, because ultimately a lot of this is dopamine seeking behavior, it's dopamine mining, isn't it? And if what you need is an abundance of that before you rest for the evening, which a lot of us do, what does that look like? So for me, I will have a wind down that involves what am I going to wear tomorrow, putting the children's uniforms out, making sure that their bags are packed, making sure that they're, in actual fact, it's a long list of achievements. That might be quite small and trivial achievements, but actually, how do you gamify that in a way that, okay, dopamine, 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 dopamine. Then there's
something dopamine giving at the same time. Listen to your favourite thing. I listened to Diary of a CEO the other day. I quite like it anyway as a video, but he interviewed Tara Swart, who is a fantastic neuroscientist, and fucking loved the whole thing. I just couldn't recommend it highly enough. It was just amazing. I just loved every moment of it. And so find something that's good.
Guided meditation as well, guided media. Like I was really skeptical, for the longest time about there was a period of time, if you worked within the NHS, the answer to everything was mindfulness. Honestly, if your leg was falling off, you needed to listen to some mindfulness and you would be fine. And I think there was a part of me that kind of reacted against that a little bit. So I was very anti-mindfulness. And I think as we've sort of talked about and said, for a certain cohort of people, mindfulness is not necessarily ideal if we're talking about quite complex and multiple trauma. So, and I had that. I don't know if we're all aware of that book. Those Ladybird books that they do that are quite jokey. I got myself in trouble one year because they did a mindfulness one and I bought it for someone who's quite a strong advocate of mindfulness and put it in the Christmas Secret Santa. And that did not land very well, true story. So I guess what I'm saying is for the longest of time, I wasn't particularly pro-mindfulness, but I am coming around to it now. It's taken a good half a decade. But I think it certainly has its place. And I think guided mindfulness and actually relaxation, and I think Debs has been quite good at this for me, because there are certain voices, there's certain people that you listen to, and in actual fact it can be it can be really lovely and wonderful. Sorry, there's been a knock on my door. Yes, very sweet. So I think I know. So I think having something like that to wind down to, and again it becomes quite ritualistic, and we are very, we are creatures of habit ultimately as human beings. We talk about Pavlov and all of that kind of learned responses and learned behaviors, and if we have a pattern in the system and a process of unwinding, and if that is listening to a certain thing or having a certain conversation, or for some people it might be sex and an orgasm before they go to bed, and that's okay, but what does that look like, and how do we associate that with a pattern of behavior that is then sleep? But I've got a few meditation exercises now, and I've been one round.
If you can't do meditation, look at mentalization. So mentalization is our ability to think of lots of different ideas to be able to calm us or to be able to do something. So Sylvania Little says, I'm currently going through an ADHD testing, and I found even when there isn't anything I'm worrying about, I still struggle to switch off random thoughts. But when I'm asleep, I can sleep 10+ hours and not wake up to alarms. Brains are weird sometimes. They are. But of course, if you're in a weird pattern of sleep where there isn't anything stable, we love stability as much as we think we don't. We love a regime. I know we think we don't, but we do. Often I don't understand why people are signed off with depression. If you have depression, have a pattern, have a habit, have something to do. If you are burnt out, get signed off work. But actually depression isn't, depending. If you've got very severe depression and clinical depression, then that's a very different thing, because you probably can't get out of bed. But
I think the other thing that's important there is, I'm struggling to switch off random thoughts. Again, we're riling against who we are ultimately in that, why are we trying to switch off from random thoughts? And I think there's something about, let's redirect our thoughts. If we're really struggling to switch off, if I've gone to bed and I've done all of the things that I would normally do and I've been lying there for half an hour and I absolutely can't switch off, then I will get up. I will get up and I will allow myself to do certain things. So I will get a remarkable out and I will scribble and I will project plan, or I will, at the moment I'm having to do a fishbone for a piece of work that I'm doing, and it's all consuming. It's a big timeline. So I'll get up and allow myself to work on that for half an hour. I'll allow myself to have something to eat, but only certain things. There's certain things that I won't eat. I definitely won't put the telly on, and I won't start looking at, Discord servers off FetLife but I will say, okay, I'll put a load of washing.
That's a rabbit hole,
isn't it? Or I will do this, or I will do that, and then I will go back to trying and going to sleep. But we rile against it. We say, oh, we ought not to be, I need to switch off of my brain's race, and then I'm doing the wrong thing. And I think sometimes just go with it, go with who you are and what you're experiencing. And if you're experiencing difficulty in switching off, what is that anxiety about? What are you worried about? What are you thinking about? What are you preoccupied about? Get up, write yourself a list, say, okay, I am struggling to sleep. I am really preoccupied about this thing. I've overcommitted. Quite often with me, I've overcommitted. Oh my God, I've overcommitted. I've got no idea what my diary's going to look like tomorrow. I've got to be in 3 places at once. What do I do with that? Okay, one of the things I'm supposed to be doing is this, and it's with this human being. The other's this, and this human being, and this is this human being. Okay, is there anyone who can do this? Is it, run with it. Allow yourself half an hour. If you can't, say, okay, I'm going to write down what it is I'm thinking and what I am experiencing, and I've looked at my diary, and at 2 o'clock tomorrow, I've got nothing in there. I'm going to go with somebody I really care about. This friend's free. I'm going to grab a coffee. Of course, it's going to be Starbucks. We're going to sit down and I'm going to talk about it.
Yeah. Look, acceptance is such a huge thing. I quite like ACT, which is acceptance therapy. It's all about acceptance and commitment and things that you can do. And it's all about, I need to accept where I am right now. My third eldest daughter has chronic pain. She has a couple of issues, and she's on a pain course at the moment, and they recommend acceptance therapy, because one of the things you have to do if you're in pain is accept that you're in pain. Like, you can't just look to a tablet. They're not giving us tablets anymore. They're not giving us injections. It's changing. We are changing the way that we're doing. So we have to acknowledge where we are. We have to accept where we are. One of my favorite little techniques is the post-it note method. So I got this out, and that's that if you find you're having lots of random thoughts, say, I talk to my brain and I say, thank you very much. This is really interesting. Let me just write them down. And I write them down and I stick them all on the side. What I say to my brain is that tomorrow at 11:30 a.m., make up your own time. This is not a set time. It's got no difference to the brain. I will have a look at this. And then you take all your post-it notes. And what you're trying to do is say, thank you very much. I accept and I feel it. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to write that down, and I'm going to see where I am tomorrow. Thank you for letting me know. So you're very much accepting and working with, and then you have a look at your post-it notes tomorrow, and then you split them. That I need to take to fucking therapy. I can't deal with that one by myself. This one I can. It's functional. This, I don't quite know where it came from and why. And if repetitive ones keep coming up, you take them somewhere else. However, what you're actually training your brain to do at that time is, I will now look at this tomorrow at 11:30. So eventually you don't need the post-it notes. You're kind of saying thank you very much to your brain. It takes weeks and weeks and weeks to do. Thank you. I really appreciate this. I will look at this tomorrow at 11:30, I promise. And I'll see what pops up, what needs to stay in my head. And then at 11:30 the next morning, you're like, right, okay, what was it? What do I need to work through? Because a lot of those thoughts as well, the other thing I'll say about lots of random thoughts, especially if you're having them, is often thoughts will disguise feelings. They're an avoidance mechanism in and of themselves. So I was working with someone yesterday, and it was complex because I started saying to him, and it's hard because there's this something called Paul Ware's trapdoor theory. You've got to be careful you don't push someone into something too quickly, but this person's been having therapy for quite a while. So, okay, how do I do this? And I say, okay, no, that's the thought. Yes, but that's the thought. That's what's going to happen. And what's the feeling? Well, that this is going to happen. That might happen. That is the thought. And that feeling would be, and it took us 15, 20 minutes to get to, oh, I'm scared. It's fear. And it's like, so sometimes you also have to connect with how you feel. Once you know that, they all well up and it changes. And that's very different as well. Titsub said, my sleep is a car crash, but AU at ADHD and now chronic fatigue. I did actually have a bedtime last year when I'm a dynamic, but I can't do that for myself. But then my question becomes, why not? Why aren't we our own dominants? Why aren't we our own submissives sometimes? If we know that's good for us, I think sometimes if you can borrow from the future, yes or no, like, okay, we're all different. And there are so many techniques that we could go through here. I am a submissive. I do not have like that permanent person in my life right now. I'm talking to someone I really like. We'll see how that goes. And it's going well so far, but they're not telling me what to do yet. However, let's really go for that theory for a minute. Let's take the whole thing about authority transference. If I want to be the best submissive I can be for whoever that person is going to be in the future, part of my responsibility is self-care. Part of my responsibility to that dominant in the future, daddy, whoever that person is, if that's the sort of, it doesn't, I'm not talking about gender or specifics here, I'm using myself as an example. So actually, if that is the case, and I think daddy would send me to bed at 10, well then let's go to bed at 10. Let's be good for daddy. Let's be good for mummy. Let's be good for sir. Let's be good for master. How do I make myself the best submissive I can be for whoever comes along? It's not a bad trick to actually start to borrow, although it's complex because future me never really feels it in the same way. So pulling backwards and feeling, okay, what's it right for me to do here? How can I work with this? What matters? That can be a nice little trick as well. And it's a very simple one to use.
It's about accountability, and I think ultimately the reality is if you've been in a dynamic previously and that has worked for you, then you're already one step ahead in terms of winning because you know what works for you. It takes people sometimes quite a lot of therapy to even get to that point. And what clearly works for you is accountability. And what you're saying is I can be in a system that works when that's external to me, but when it's internal, then that doesn't work. And you have to find the external accountability. You have to be able to look at that and say, what does that look like? And I'm not going to advocate things like Weight Watchers and things because I think long term they're problematic. But we all, we are in a culture where we do know lots of people do make meaningful change, and it's through being accountable. If I really, really want to be accountable, then I will tell Debs I'm going to do something, and it doesn't always happen, but there's at least a 50% more likelihood that the thing will occur. And then what does that look like? I will, if I put something publicly, oh my goodness, it goes up to 75%. So what does that look like for you? What matters? What's a meaningful kind of degree of accountability? And we all do that in very, very different nuanced ways all of the time. I think you have to find a way that works for you. If you're in therapy, maybe you make yourself accountable to a therapist. Maybe that you look at, what and how do I realistically do this?
And I'm going to come back to you, Stephen. So just to carry on this flow, I promise I'm coming back to what you're asking as well. So I have such a problem with that phrase you just used, Simon. So for people who don't know, Simon and Poppy and Simon. So, and I know these two humans really well. One, on my own dominant, pathological demand avoidance. If I hear that fucking sentence much more at the moment, I'm going to thump someone.
That's how you feel, Debs.
Yeah. PDA has never been clinically recognised. It is not anywhere. It's nothing. There is a debate about what it means. There is a debate, and actually it is very much for people who are on the autism spectrum. It's not really for anyone else. But no, I know you didn't, but I'm on a fucking mission now. So there are massive disagreements, even with if you look at anyone who's on the spectrum about how people feel about this as well and how they are, it's fucking complex. However, what I'm seeing in more and more is, and I've got it in a parent at the moment, is, yeah, but my child won't do that. They've got PDA. How fucking absolute is that statement? How damaging is that for the child about being a parent? Now, we don't have to demand. I'm not going to demand of myself to go to sleep. I'm going to say, I think that might be the best thing for me to do as a human being. That ain't demanding. That's educating. That's enriching. That's nurturing. It's posturing a question. And I think that's something that we really need to learn to do. But PDA is one of my favorite hatred statements. I thought some research had shown that talking about goals made you less likely to achieve them, as you've already got some of the dopamine here. If you have ADHD, that might be more true. And when we think about something happening, it's like orgasm. The thinking about it is actually better for us than the actual doing of it 9 times out of 10. So that's quite a strong one. So that's very true. However, if our goals align with our ethics, our morals, and our values, we are way more likely to achieve them. And if morally you want to, or ethically you want to be somebody who gets to sleep to be that good girl, good boy, or something else, that could tie into being not your own dominant, but that person. So let me read out Stephen's question.
Can I just argue with my husband on the internet first before we go to the next one?
Please do. It's on video.
I am only joking, and he's been very lovely. He's brought me a pink Starbucks cup and brought me a coffee, which I think is very sweet. But I think as well as interesting because I've been reading more and more about the the double empathy problem, which is quite interesting. And somebody mentioned this to me, and I have quite a bit of neurodivergence in my house. And, you know, I think when it comes to PDA, I think there's a very, very interesting school of thought when it comes to the double empathy problem, that in actual fact, it's not necessarily pathological demand avoidance, but it's about the inability to understand and translate that empathy and that invalidation that comes from that creates the problem, as opposed to this idea that, you know, the goals are likely to be achieved because of PDA. And that's quite an emerging piece of research for anyone who is diagnosed as having any kind of neurodivergence or lives with people who are, and they're not aware of the double empathy problem. It's really fascinating. It's only one paper. It's not hard science, but I think it is emerging in terms of how we understand empathy, validation, and communication skills around people who are ND. And we see so many patterns of behaviour, and certainly in our therapy spaces, Debs and I see a lot of people who are neurodivergent and come together in relationships.
And we're neurodivergent.
Of course we are, but ADHD and autism, you know, very much appeals to people who like the relationships that carry the dynamics that we work with, and then they come into our therapy spaces. So I think it's really, really interesting, and I think we'll be using it more and more in couples work to understand how we, I guess, get people to empathise and then ultimately bridge the gap of understanding between people that we work with. And there is part of me that thinks PDA very much lives in that hemisphere of kind of communication. We can go on now.
Yeah, you can look up the double empathy problem, and you can look up PDA as well. They're all out there. Okay, so Stephen said, when I was growing up, I've had troubles with anger management and communication due to being teased at school, but also due to the way that my parents were in arguments. Now I started to do some form of meditation or yoga, yin yoga, and realized that daily meditation might be a way to get more calm in myself. Do you think it might help in standing calmer in situations, not to freak out and start shouting back in an argument with my partner's Polly, but instead keeping my calm? Additional info: teachers taught me to count to 10. Parents raise their voices to get their points across. There are quite a few points there. Poppy, do you want to start, or shall I? Or
I'm going to go. I mean, I think the first thing is about appropriate, assertive communication. So the danger is, in terms of what you're talking about, is you go from one extreme to another. You go from communicating in quite an angry voice to losing your voice entirely. And I think that is a real danger, and it will just exacerbate problems longer term. I think ultimately, if you are having difficulties with anger and they stem from childhood, it's really important that you're heard, but it's really important that you're heard appropriately. So if you do not have a stock catalogue of assertive communication answers and responses and kind of things to, you know, ways to advocate for yourself in places that hold conflict, then that's really, really important. I think it's very difficult because you're talking about having ACEs, so adverse childhood experiences. So the chances are you're going to have a very, you know, we talk about having a limbic response. So all the F's that Deb's very, very articulately got out before, and I always trip over when I try and do that, that is going to be your response.
That's like
yeah.
Flop, faux fawn.
Absolutely. So you're probably going to go to that place when you're faced with conflict. So I think it's really, really important that you have some stock kind of conversations, or you're able to converse with your partner and explain what happens to you, which one of those you experience, how you experience them, what that looks like, articulate how that is for you and what your experiences are outside of an actual conflict or outside of a difficult conversation, so that that understanding is present. And then you look at how you assertively develop some communication tools that you can bring to that space. I think the other thing that I'll say when we're talking about anger is it's really, really important to recognize what the triggers are for that. So if you are prone to feeling quite angry often, I think it's really important to look at that. You know, maybe have an anger monitoring record, have a diary, have some kind of system that you start documenting how you were angry, what made you angry, what that looked like, what did that feel like, you know, what does anger feel like for you? Really start to get a picture of how that looks and what that looks like. And I think that's really, really important. You know, if anger is something that's really difficult, you know, and you're experiencing it very regularly and it is a problem in a relationship, again, it's something I would take to therapy if that's within your means to do, and you can do that. And the other thing is about forgiveness as well. Forgiveness is really, really, really important. And there's, you know, lots and lots of research out there about the 4 steps of forgiveness and the 4 processes of forgiveness. And if you're not familiar with that, familiarize yourself with that. There's loads of stuff about that on the internet, but those would be my kind of start for 10 in terms of 10 minutes of what I would do with if you're having real difficulties with anger.
And I would not go on an anger management course because they charge a fucking fortune, and you're probably better off having one-to-one therapy, which would actually probably end up costing you less. overall, over time. I've just put a link up there for something called non-violent communication, which is also about Marshall Rosenberg wrote a book a long time ago. Do I think it's fully kept up to date? No, but I think it's a really good basic place to start. I think what you have to look at is if you imagine you just put your back out and you're hurt, the pattern, which Poppy was talking about earlier about something else, patterns really matter. And if that pattern's been established over your lifetime, that's the only way to get heard, we go back to the patterns of familiarity that we know and don't take time to try and do something else, Stephen, if that makes sense. So one of the things we have to look at is what's the initial arrow? What do I mean by that? So let's say you put your back out, as I said, thunk, there's an arrow. Oh, my back's just gone, fuck. We don't know what's coming. We just know we've hurt our back. So we're like, oh God, that hurts. Oh God, that's not okay. But then through this bad back, we realize we have to crawl to the toilet. We have to realize that we can't eat or drink properly. We're terrified of sneezing and we're rolling about in agony and all sorts of things. So the next time our back goes, we're not shot by the arrow. We're shot by 5 or 6 that predict everything that's about to happen. So we create our pattern. Oh, fuck, my back's gone. I won't be able to go to sleep. Oh my God, I can't go to work. I won't be able to go out. And we put all these things and we forget to look at the initial ow. What is it that hurt you in the first place? What is it that created this to happen for you? What's going on here? So, and when Rosenberg talks about nonviolent communication, he talks about the observation in that moment. What is happening here? Let's not just be generalized about or use generalizations. Let's look at what's going on for me. One of my favorite expressions around anger is you are entitled to feel angry. You are not entitled to be aggressive. They are two distinct things. And it's like teaching a child the difference between the name for something and the action of something, like a noun or a verb, something that we do. Anger isn't a doing thing. And anger can be really powerful and effective. It's like a fucking steam train if you direct it in the right way at the right time. But of course, if you've always been taught that, you haven't developed the link I put earlier, we haven't developed the coping mechanisms within which to manage those. I've got 2 lost boys at the moment through cheerleading. I've always got somebody lost in my life, but I've got 2 lost boys and they're both about 23, but they're boys to me but one of them, Dan, has just stopped smoking dope for the first time and he's 23 years old and he has not had a spliff-free life since he was 11. Since 11, he's been taking 4 to 5 spliffs a day. And if he wants to coach at cheer, he's now got to be on a drug test every month. And Jesus Christ, it's in every fiber of his being and his hair and everywhere. It's really in his system, but the tests are really positive. What he says to me all the time is, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to handle it. I can't cope with this. And we have to truly think about that because that's really important. If we are stuck in a place like an 11-year-old is, what you have to think about is this is all I've ever seen. I'm very young in my approach to anger or being heard. And one of the key things Poppy said is there a difference between being angry and being assertive. We don't need to persecute. We don't need to be angry. We don't need to get angry. We need to be assertive sometimes, however. And so we have to observe what's going on. We have to look at that initial hour. We have to look at what are these feelings that are coming up, because those sensations, which aren't the same as a thought, which is what I was talking about earlier as well, which is strange. Everything's looping around together a little bit. How do we convey what we're feeling? What words can we use? Do we have the right vocabulary to communicate what it is that we're feeling without shouting? And often that means our vocabulary isn't wide enough emotionally yet. So again, it's about learning. And also, what are my needs from this? Because one of the things he said was everything I do is in service to my needs. And that's quite interesting, isn't it? What does that mean? I need love, I need sustenance, I need care, whether you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, whether you look at Max Neef's model, where you've got different needs for different reasons at times. It doesn't matter what model you look at. What do you need from this conversation? And that for me, and Jerry will laugh and go, for fuck's sake, and maybe Poppy will, you've got to pre-mortem. You've got to think about the outcome in the future of when I shout here, which is very complex to do because you're trying to interfere that stimulant that's coming up. If I shout and if I do this, I'm actually not going to get what I need. I'm going to get what I'm used to. And I think often we say, I need to feel safe, when actually it's not safety, it's familiarity, and it's really bad for us. What do I want out of this and how do I get it is very key. So we also have to understand what physiologically is going on in our body, because your body will be showing you symptoms of anger before you're even conscious of it. You will be feeling things. There is a really good piece of research. I'll see if I can find it now while we're talking. There's a really good piece of research. Greatest Magazine did a really good piece on it, actually, about where we feel things in our body. And this is a magazine article on it. I'm not going to put the proper research in. Who wants to know that? Well, you might do, but it will link you to it. You'll be able to find it. But I like this one because it does a lot of other things. So this is a magazine article. If you start to understand where anger is felt in your body, you'll be able to feel it coming. So you'll be able to do something about it. And by doing something, that's acceptance. That's working with a feeling. What is it you need from it and how is this going to work? And often where we feel anger, what the infographic talks about is where we are, I call it fizzy or buzzy, where we are neutral and where we are very dead. There is no deadness in anger in the body. There is some neutrality, but we have fizziness in our calves, our feet, our thighs, above our, just from our rib cage up, whereas fear goes more into our stomach. So from our rib cage up, massively around our heart, but it's more central. It goes into our arms, very much in our hands because we're going to punch someone or do something. It's all over our head and it's very much in our jaw. Oh, fucking. So it's really interesting physiologically what's happening. So how do I also calm that down? How can I'm a really big believer in somatics and connecting a lot of our thoughts with our bodies and making sure that we can go with what we're feeling, because you're born feeling, you're not born thinking, you're not born behaving. Those things come later. Your foundations to your house are feelings. So if you don't get in touch with them and you don't start to learn what they're telling you, and you've been taught a pattern that is not effective, you have to relearn your patterns. And I'm not saying that's easy, it does take some time, but understanding your own body can really help that as well. Understanding different options. And then rather than demanding something from somebody, we can request, we can ask, we can state. As we were just saying, there's a very big difference between assertion and demanding. And then it's funny because that linked to Simon as well in what I was saying. We can tell our kids what to do. I don't believe in authoritative draconian parenting. But I also don't believe in liberal parenting either. Neither of these are effective or good for our children or for ourselves. What we need is respectful parenting in the middle, which has boundaries and consequences and needs so that we can fit into society and life, but is also mixed with loving, caring and understanding, and allowing children to find their own way, to understand their own emotions, to see it through, to be able to learn to ride that emotional wave. And at the moment, if you're getting really angry, is that all that physiology builds up. And this is just like giving birth, actually, because you're like, oh, I can't do it. Fuck on, it's really building. And often anger cuts off another emotion. Although it is a primary emotion, it might mean that you're hurt. It might mean that you're scared. People won't listen to me unless I shout. People will be horrible to me if I say this. My experience is being bullied. I don't like this. So one big one is not being able to find the right words to answer in the moment and then to start in the offense defense.
And I think taking a break, you do not have to find the right words in that moment. I think it's absolutely fine to be, I'm a huge big fan of being, radically candid and saying, do you know what, I'm feeling some big feelings. Yeah, I'm feeling some big feelings in response to what you've just said there. I'm not really even sure what those feelings are. I'm going to go walk the dog. We'll talk about it in half an hour. I think that's
that bit that Poppy just said is really important, though. We will talk about it then. Yes. When you give someone a time, that's fundamental. What she just said is really important.
And I think that's absolutely fine. That's an okay response. And quite often I think, what we're talking about as well is the acquisition of having a need met. Debs is talking about being in touch with our emotions. What does it feel like? The body.
And a need. What is it?
And it's this acquisition of I have a need that needs to be met, and I think sometimes we assume that that's straightforward, and it's not. And I love to do a lovely exercise with people. Anyone who is in therapy with me in the room will probably already know this, but one of the things that I do really routinely when I work with people, and it started from working with someone who I think is relatively young person, and I did a piece of work with them, and I remember them saying, I'm going to go kill myself. I was like, okay, why are you going to kill myself? Because I fucking hate myself because I'm so needy. And I was like, oh, okay, what do you need? They couldn't answer that question. I've got no idea. Well, come on, you're so fucking needy. Tell me what you need. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll make a deal with you. You go away and you write down a list of all of your needs, and I'll go away and I'll write a list of my needs, and we'll compare and contrast them, and we'll talk about them next time, and you'll still be here in a week's time, won't you? Yeah, well, I'll see you in a week. Okay, so we brought them back, and they managed to bring back a list of how fucking needy they were, and I think there was 8 to 10 things on this list. I'd gone away and had 72. I definitely won. I'm very competitive for anyone who doesn't know me. And we talked through that, and we obviously it led on to a piece of work. But I think routinely now when I work with people, I really like to say, okay, what are your top five needs? What do you think they are? And I think it's really, really important to be able to identify those if you do not know what they are. And if you are in these conflict situations, you're having difficult conversations, I would hasten that a lot of that revolves around the threat. That threat system been activated in terms of the acquisition of one of those particular needs. And I think it's really important to move on from that, because going back to what Debs was saying, an actual fact, as a human being, it's really important to recognize and learn how to accept no. To be able to ask for what I want and for no to be okay. And the piece of work that I do with people is I look at those 5 priority needs, what we view our 5 priority needs to be. And they change, they fluctuate all the time. Like I say, I pick from 72, there's a lot there. But you say, okay, what are your 5 priority needs at the moment? How do I go about meeting those needs for myself? All about empowerment. I'm a huge fan of empowerment. How do I look at how that would work? What do I do to meet those needs in me? And then in an ideal world, in a loving and supportive relationship, what would somebody do to meet those needs alongside me? What would that collaborative relationship look like? How do I go about asking for that? How do I have conversations and communication that get those needs met? And ultimately, if that can't happen, then I have to rely more heavily on this line, which is how I'll meet them. But how I'll meet them might involve other people. So it might involve friendships, it might involve connection, it might involve, but how do I want my partner and the people around me to meet them? And how am I telling them that? How am I communicating that? Really, really important. And then if that doesn't happen, what does that look like? And I think that's a really healthy cycle to get into in terms of what we're talking about, because ultimately, anger quite often just is that threat of this being removed, or it not been obtainable to me, or it not been possible. And it really does live in that place of being disempowered is my kind of thoughts and feelings on it. And it is about forgiveness and acceptance, and that self-belief that you will be okay in and of yourself.
I think that's one of my keys to trust, actually. When we trust someone, I don't need to trust somebody else. I don't need to trust my friends, which means I can be free in my friendship. I don't need to trust my partners. I need to trust that whatever they do, I'll be okay. Because that makes me okay. I know that I'll be okay. I'll be sad, I'll be angry, I'll have lots and lots of emotions, but emotions don't define who we are, and we get lost in that as well sometimes, something chronic. And so what I've linked to there is a workbook on the needs inventory, which is a freebie from the non-violent communication people. So you can have a look at that and see what you think of it as well. So that can be a handy one to do, because if you're not getting your needs met, what is it I need? What does this look like? How am I going to feel when I get them met? And that's the other danger sometimes with needs a little bit, is a lot of us don't actually want our needs met, because if we do, we're going to have to face up to reality. And I think one of the things that Poppy said as well that I really love, that I'm a big believer of, is we've got to stop thinking that the world is going to sort it for us, or that our friends owe us something, or that people owe us time, or that people owe us a relationship, or anything else. People don't owe you anything apart from just a very basic respect.
Going back to what Stephen said there, so if I was looking at that and talking to you and examining that, Stephen, it's really interesting. So what you're saying is, in actual fact, that second paragraph, which I hadn't read when I answered you, is, I have a real need for things to feel quite fair. Fairness and justice is really important to me. And again, going back to what we're saying, why is that? That quite often can be linked to neurodiverse thinking. It could absolutely be a myriad of other things. I'm not saying that's the case here, but recognizing that I need things to feel fair. So then what do you do about that? What happens if things don't feel fair? How do you acknowledge that? Quite often that's the case. You know, and the first one is I think that's a simpler one in some ways, because that's, do you know what? I need to be able to step out. I need to be able to have a moment. I need to not be, but again, it's linked to impulsivity actually as well. You do a little bit of a picture there. So, you know, what do I do to give myself that time and that space and that actual reflection to another person that this doesn't feel fair? This is what might make this feel a little bit more fair, or these things are outside of my, you know, here it's about sphere of influence and control. Some things are outside of our control. We can't make them feel fair. A lot of what we talked about in the first part of this workshop about trauma around the world, and there's nothing we can do to make that any better than it realistically is for most of us in this room. Then what?
And then feelings aren't facts.
No.
They are a response to something. So what are the facts here? And one of the things I love from Katie Byron's questions are, especially if I think something isn't fair, I say, well, is that true? Yeah, it fucking well is. Is it true? No. The first true is subjective. It is true to me. The second question of is that true is, can you factually prove it? Would 300 people agree with you? Would we all have the same response? Can you prove it in a court of law or biology lab? And it's always, we don't quite want to let go. We sort of go, no. It's never an easy no. And it's really interesting because what do we even define as fair, and what do we get out of the first, that's not fair anyway, or that no? We cannot right every injustice in the world. We just don't have that power. And I also think we need to look into like our circles of influence and control that we have. And there's an actual, I'll find it in a minute, the circles of control that we have. Because if we just think, we have to look at what can I empower myself with? What can I do? What does that mean to me? Because often, so there's an article by Claire Newton, I quite like hers. Let me find it for you. There you go. So if I can't control this, what can I control? How can I make myself feel better? Because it is about feelings, and these feelings aren't true. And emotions are interesting. The word motion is in the word emotion. It will move. We move. We can learn to move a little quicker, and we can learn to move a little more effectively. And we're not necessarily stuck. Nobody is stuck. We just feel like we are, because we often use old patterns not to move us forward. So I don't think life is fair, and I think that's something we have to accept. And sometimes I very much think, especially in a relationship, is you can be right if you want, or you can be in a relationship. Take your pick. Because if all we are is right with somebody, that person isn't going to want to be with us. If all we do is prove our point and state that this is the way it is, they are not going to want to be with us. How do we find that balance? And that's complex. And Miss Bird's put, I've always been the sort of person who needs to take a break when something upsets me, as my emotions will be so high. But I've always been told I'm being mean to my partners. By whom? By not wanting to talk in the moment as they get left waiting. How can I make my partners more comfortable when I need to take this step back? The key. Go on.
I would definitely talk about window of tolerance here as well. And if you have a partner who's not familiar with that, and hopefully someone's going to find a nice graphic for me, because I'm rubbish at that kind of thing. But if you are not aware of window of tolerance, which I think you may be, but if you're not, familiarise yourself with that, but also share that with this partner. I think that's a really, really nice illustrative example of what's going on for you. So ultimately, my emotions are up here, and it's in everybody's interest. It's not just in your interest, it's in their interest, it's in the interest of the person that you're communicating with. If they truly are communicating with you to understand you and to listen to you and to hear you, then they want you to be communicative when you're within your window of tolerance. And I think that's something I'm sure if Simon is still in this room, he will be laughing his socks off, because the hypocrisy that is coming out of my mouth right now is wonderful, because I'm quite impulsive and I want to communicate and I want to make it all right and I want to fix it immediately when we're in a place of conflict. But ultimately, I know and I recognise that both people need to be within that window of tolerance for effective communication to happen. It's not always easy, it's hard. You know, I feel like I'm almost your partner in this conversation, Miss Birds, because I know it, but when it comes to it, I find it really, really difficult. I think with that's fed back though in a really, really loving way. Look, I can't talk to you right now. These are the reasons why I can't talk to you. I'm not in my window of tolerance. We're going to come back and we're going to have a conversation later on. If you have got the skills to be able to communicate that to a partner and you both understand the why, because you've used the analogy of window of tolerance and that kind of thing, and that's still not respected in the context of that relationship, then that would be a real problem for me. That's somebody not able to meet my communicative needs, and they're not showing any emotional intelligence.
And it's also one of the keys that we just mentioned, and Poppy's just mentioned it again, that I will talk to you later, but we need to be more specific. He here is to turn and say, this isn't about me abandoning you in your moment. Your need is to understand and get all the answers. My need is to go away and to connect with that and then come back.
Yeah.
Right now, both of our needs matter, but our needs don't match each other. And that's part of the problem here. I understand that you need to know. I understand that that's really important to you. And I need to just take a little bit of time. However, what I'm going to do, as I know it often doesn't take me long, I'm going to go away and I'm going to come back in 30 minutes or an hour. Don't take 48 hours. Try not to, try and get into that. It's a long time. Try and come back within a reasonable time to say, let me just go away and I will come back, and fucking come back in that time. And then when you do that, what your partners start to do is to trust you, because you show them that you do come back and you show them that you do that. And if you, however, if you are forever unable to deal with that, they're also not going to feel very comfortable. That also then needs some accountability and some action from you. If Poppy is frustrated or not okay with something, she'll often just disappear for a while. It might be an hour, it might be 3 hours. I never or rarely give her more than a day. I will turn around and say, where the fuck are you? But I don't say it like that. So there also comes a point where it's not okay to disappear for I remember speaking to a client once and he said, oh, she's decided we're going to take a break. And I said, okay, how long for? And he said, I don't know. And I said, what are you going to do now? And he said, well, I'm just going to wait and see. And I said, for how long? Shall I get you a dress? Do you want to be Miss Faversham? Should we put you in a wedding gala? How long are you going to wait for? 12 years? And he went, no. But it's really interesting. It's not fair to make somebody wait for too long. If, however, you then cannot always manage, and it's a constant thing, get into some therapy, get into some help, start to self-reflect. Why? If your window of tolerance is too small for life, or for conflict specifically, because what you find is window of tolerance. I love Dan Siegel. I've got most of his books. He's somebody I really read up on and love. Gabor Mate, all these different people that say really good things. But Dan Siegel is really good, as really interesting. He's got some really interesting books. And it's his baby, really. So it's, if your window of tolerance can be different for slightly different things and different emotions, if, however, your window of tolerance is really small for conflict, you need to work on why you're avoiding conflict, what that looks like, what that means, and how you can manage it a little better.
And I always think if someone is accusing you of being mean, that's their experience. If they're experiencing you as being mean in the moment,
they're not emotionally mature, that's for sure.
No, but quite often what it does mean is that I would benefit from, or I would like more reassurance, or I would like more validation in this conversation than I'm currently getting. So again, what Debs has said there is perfect for that. I understand that you want to talk. I understand that our needs are misaligned at the moment. I understand that, all those really quite validate and reassuring statements, we will come back and this will happen. That should really soothe that feeling of someone has been mean to me. And if it's not, then again, I think that then becomes a them problem and they need to get to therapy themselves. That's just me saying how I feel.
And so play the we are safe game. And this is really important, because I love this, right? Something might come up and make a noise, because I'm just going to grab a link that might make a...
What techniques generating?
Right, so it did make a noise. This is the thing I watched the other day from this neuroscientist. So if you like people like Siegel, you will love her. What's important as well is the safe game here. It's not a game, but it's really important. This is Tara Swart. This is something that she did. She didn't write the safe game. This is mine. I haven't heard anyone else say it, but I think it's really important if you know that you're actually going to be safe. So one of the things I'll say, and I'll ask for a partner if they want some time, it's when they get to know me, is what they turn and say is, Debs, our relationship, we are safe. We are good. I understand that you might not be in a good place and I might not be in a good place right now. I need to go and think about it. We are safe. We are good. Give me 30 minutes. That's what I'm going to take. Don't always ask. And I'm going to go away. I'm going to come back and then we'll talk about it. However, I just want you to know we are safe. That can alleviate a fucking shit ton of problems, especially if your partner is neurodiverse, has rejection sensitivity dysphoria of some kind that's related to neurodiversity, or has borderline personality disorder, which is now called something completely different, emotionally unstable, so EUPD. So there's all these different names out there for all these different things. Just to tell someone that they're safe, we are safe. I just want to go and think about this.
We've renamed EUPD, by the way, so it's not even EUPD anymore. It's now complex emotional and relational needs for most people, but it means exactly what we're talking about.
I'm so fed up with a name change every fucking 5 minutes. But I actually think the new name is probably one of the best ones out of the last three, because it is about complex emotional needs. It really is. That's what it's about. Complex. Yeah, I think it's much better. But I digress. But so the SAFE technique. Simon's trying to figure out the acronym. Is that what you're doing, Simon?
I don't know. Simon's putting the bins out apparently, which is good. There's some messages from Simon there, but then Miss Bird has gone on who we're answering, who we're speaking to, which I think is quite interesting. She said, I think I struggle as in the moment, especially if someone triggers trauma, I will usually be completely nonverbal, so the words are very hard. I've tried writing things down as that's easier than talking, and I pre-warn partners that when I'm upset, I tend to shut down, and I will also need to shut down so I can then talk about it later. I worked with somebody once and they had a diagnosis of autism, and this is kind of what we did in the context of this workshop. We've almost written a script in terms of what would be good to communicate to somebody in this situation, and what they did is they essentially took a card. It was kind of a generic, very nice, it was almost like a Valentine's Day card, but it was a card that said, we rock, and it was two little rocks, and it was whatever, and it was lovely, and they had the script that worked for them. Essentially, it's like when you give a yellow card, you give a red card, you don't have to do much in terms of a symbol. We all know what that means. It's universally understood. If someone's got a yellow card, they need to be on the best behaviour. The next one's going to be red, then they're going to get sent off, and then we're going to be hanging burning effigies around the country of them. But that's because I've just watched the Beckham documentary. But I digress. We know what is meant by something that is quite a simplistic symbol. In the context of this, I think writing that down, having something pre-prepared, if you really do go non-verbal and you're not able to articulate what it is we're articulating here, you can have that ready. That becomes we all have behavior when you're in the context of a long-term relationship, but when that person does that, it means this. We know what that means, whether it's the wearing that set of underwear, it's game on tonight, or in actual fact this has happened. For me, I'm going to go and have a shower as hot as the core of the earth. I'm going to give her half an hour. We all have those things. So there's nothing wrong with you having something like that you use within a relationship, and you ultimately have had all of those conversations about what it means to you both outside of anybody being impacted in terms of window tolerance. You have those conversations when you're in a good place. This is why I always say have regular radar meetings. I have regular conversations where you go and you walk and you talk and you say, these are the values that we want to have in our relationship. This is the way we want to be with one another. This is how we want to care and how we want to be cared for. That's when you have a conversation to say, this is what happens to me. I struggle in these moments. I'm going to have this prepared for these moments. And when this happens, this is what I'd like to happen. That's really, really important. If you're doing all of your conversation as a response and a reaction to things not being great, that in itself is a really big problem. This communication should happen when things are good. How much conversation are we having when there's not a problem in the relationship?
And it's so interesting, isn't it? Like, I'm working with a family at the moment, and it's so complex because they said to me, no, she should come because she's the problem. So this child is now the black sheep of the family. Whereas actually what I'm trying to say is the system is the problem. We can't just respond to somebody when things are bad. We need to make the system good. And we need to make the system better and more effective and impactful. And it's really hard to get that through to people sometimes. Often people will walk away from therapy when they're feeling good. Whereas actually, if you come in at a bad moment, you probably left it pretty late. We want to go through, we want to still work through when you're feeling good, because now we can avoid or help and stop the bad. And I will talk about accountability. If you know that is you, and you are not getting any help, go to a charity, go to somebody to try and work through some of these things as well. Because people get really fed up with people who say, but I can't help it because. And as much as I want to say people don't, they do, because people are like that. So it's really important to own, I've got a problem and I'm really working on it, and this is what, because people also appreciate that too, whether it's reading a book, doing it yourself, getting online, looking something up, that really matters too. So anything you can do helps. Stephen, as I am in poly relationships, I found the multi-amory podcast. Yeah, that's great. As a tool, I found their book very interesting. It is Triforce of Communication is a very great tool from that one. Communication topics, ask me for needs, no needs, and then Poppy related to that, because actually radar meetings is that principle as well. But we should, I've written a piece ages ago that states we should treat relationships like business meetings, like a business, because when you go into a business, you have a contract, you know what it is you're getting into, you know what the expectations are, you're regularly reviewed, you're regularly motivated, hopefully, it depends on your work, clearly. And it's really important to understand that there are lots of constructs within that that are really positive. We don't do that in a relationship. We don't, and I think it's really important. Coffee time, I like the idea of someone making clear the relationship was safe during conflict, but I feel like I'd emotionally struggle to believe them. Of course, but of course, if they keep coming back, we need to also change our pattern, because if they say we're safe and they come back and they keep doing what they said they promised that they would do, and it is safe for now, we're not promising safe forever. If we're promising I'm coming back and I'm sorting this out, if they keep doing it for us, if we keep not believing them, we have to ask what's going on for us. If they do it 3, 4, 5 times, I think we need to start to have some trust. And if you don't trust them, can you trust yourself? What does that look like? How can you know that you're okay? That makes a difference too. The relationship is safe. We are safe. I can't make someone else safe. I don't think it's a promise either. People stand up and say, I will love you until the day I die, or until the day you die.
But I think that's fine in relationships as well. We have our bronze, silvers and golds, because ultimately what we're saying is, you know, I like the idea of being clear that the relationship is safe during conflict. And what does safe mean to you? What does safe look like?
Work it out.
And what is unsafe? So if something is unsafe, these things will be occurring. Okay, if these things occur, then they become those golds in a relationship. So, you know, for me, I would have a few, but a relationship would be unsafe for me if these things were breached. And there are certain things that I could forgive, and there are certain things that would only ever be breached once or twice. And I think sometimes we have this idea that, you know, for things to be safe, they need to be perfect. Where in actual fact, we really examine that, and we examine that. I think that's why I like that idea of examining things in a tiered system. Because, you know, there are absolutes, and then we should have our absolute red lines. But then they are, well, do you know what? The relationship is good enough. It's safe enough. It's not perfect.
And that principle, bronzes, silvers and golds, is really important in relationships, because it's part of the contract that you're making. I think part of the contract that people have can be the breakup clause, the arguments clause, all these things that we can discuss, but we need to define words really importantly. So what does that word mean to you? What does it mean to me? And I'll often say to people, tell me what that means. Let's say they use the word safe. And they look at me as if I'm fucking stupid. And I say, no, I know what it means to me, but this is the whole point here. I don't know what it means to you. I'm going to make assumptions. And we do that as couples. I want you to be faithful. Oh, okay. But you've got that person's number and you snobbed them. That's not infidelity, though. Infidelity is penetration. Well, it's not for me. A kiss is worse. What the fuck are you talking about? We did not negotiate clearly with those fucking words. And if we understand that people have a lot of bronze rules, and those bronze rules might be things like put the toilet seat up or down, put the bleach back in, put the fucking cup in the dishwasher, take the bins out. They might be our bronzes. Our silvers might be, could we communicate about this or sort this out? And our golds are, if you do that to me, it's absolute, and I'm gone. And I remember being in bed with someone many years ago, and we were just playing a game, relaxing, and he'd kind of outstayed his welcome. He came to stay for a little bit and stayed a bit too long, and I was uncomfortable with it. And I said, right, it really is time for you to go. We'd organised an Airbnb for him to go to because he was moving back to the UK. And we were in bed, and I have a family text, and it's quite busy, and I don't put it on mute. And one of the messages came down, and I flicked it back up. And he said, what was that? And I said, I think it was a text from Brian. It was a family text. And he said, I don't believe you. Let me see. And I said, oh, okay. I said, I'm going to be really clear with you right now. If you look at my phone, which you are completely entitled to do, and I will let you, I don't have a problem with that. If you look at that message, when I drop you off in the morning, you will never see me again. And he looked at me like I was nuts, and you're being fucking ridiculous. I went, okay, I'm just going to reiterate it. If you have to check my phone in order to believe me after I've let you into my home and invited you and you've been welcome and I've looked after you, you will never see me again. Takes the phone, has a look. It's from Brian. It's exactly what I said it was going to be. And I said, and right now, the next words out of your mouth are, I'm sorry, actually, or something else along those lines. And he went, just being dramatic. Okay. And I drove him to London the next day because it was on my way because I was going to go and do something else. And I dropped him off and he texted me and he said, well, you're a bit miserable. And I said, no, I'm not miserable. I'm really good. And he went, right, so when are we seeing each other again? And I said, I'm never seeing you again. It was a gold for me. You don't have the right to do that. Look, if you're my dominant and you want access to my phone, you can fucking have it, but we haven't negotiated that. I've got nothing to hide. It was really interesting. It's really important that we work it out, and we can get our goals really wrong, like don't have sex with somebody else. What do you mean by sex? And you say don't have. What if we're talking about sexual assault or rape? Are they allowed under that? Oh yes, of course I mean those, but it ain't clear. So, and those words are really important for us to define. So when I'm working with people, we define those words and we learn together at the same time. Communication methods, communication skills, taking down the violent communication, taking down the aggression, helping impact all of those things. I've just had a direct message. Apologies. Go on.
I was just about to say, in this scenario, it's definitely about examining that safe, isn't it? And for me, I would be looking at psychological safety, creating psychological
emotional, physical.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about those bronze, silvers and golds being quite functional in terms of that conversation we had, taking the bins out, doing the things. But the reality is what is safe? If one person's safe is, I'm never going to beat you to a pulp, and another person's safe is, I don't feel safe to be criticised, then my God, there's the gap is vast between any of that. So we really, really have to understand, well, what doesn't feel safe to one another, and then what happens when we touch upon unsafe? What then? What's the agreement that we've got for one another? But anyway, it sounds like you've got another question.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you. So it's all about, because sometimes we can't agree to somebody else's safe. Trigger warnings and different things are quite divisive, for want of a better word. I don't put trigger warnings on my writings on FetLife. You're on FetLife. And I don't know if your trigger might be a can of baked beans, if I mentioned, or anything else as well. How do we do that? How do we manage that? It's really important. Anyway, let's go to this next question. Apologies if you've had a similar question already, but what's a good way to disclose previous trauma in the context of a negotiation? It often brings things up and sort of takes me out of what's happening in the present. I know what I'm going to say very easily, and for me that is, I would, if you can't talk about it, write it down. Have a small piece about you. Have something that the person can read or listen to and say, this is something that's quite triggering for me. And this is something I can't work on. And of course, the more exposure we have to triggers, the less impact they can have on us. And of course, if we have trauma therapy, that can help us as well. There's lots of things. Poppy, where do you want to go with that one?
Definitely. I think ultimately as well, I would be... Sorry, I've just got a message saying I need a ring light apparently to illuminate my face in the session. Somebody sent me.
I've got a ring light. That's what I've got. It does make me look a bit.
I was going to say, I think I haven't got the question in front of me, but I think the thing that stands out for me in terms of that question is it pulls me out of. So discussing and obviously what you're saying is I'm having symptoms of perhaps re-experiencing or feeling a little bit dereal, or something is happening to you physiologically when you were talking about your trauma. So that's the first thing that I will say, and that's absolutely fine. But that should be the function of what you're doing in that moment. That's a really bad put together sentence. So for me, if I'm discussing my previous trauma, I'm making a disclosure, for example, that will be what we are doing. So I will be, okay, I want to have a conversation with you about something. So personally, if I was having that conversation, say I was meeting a new player person, I would be having that completely outside of the context of any play. So there would not be play on the table, there would not be sex on the table, there would not be anything on the table. I'd be doing it somewhere publicly, like a coffee shop, because for me, that actually helps me stay.
And not just before sex, like when you're in a good space.
It'd be going, I want to have a conversation with you about something. You know, this is something that I would have with anybody as a preliminary to plan. You know, how am I doing that? And it's something that is methodically kind of thought through. And I know myself, I know how I would, you know, all of my difficult conversations happen in coffee shops. Nobody will be surprised. But, you know, how do you want this to look for you? You know, clearly you're saying I want to make a disclosure. Some people like to make that disclosure really, really early on. Some people make it a little bit later. That will depend on how much it impacts on you. But it might be that you can do some sorts of play and nobody would know that you have lived experience trauma. It might be that the first time that you do anything that puts you in a vulnerable headspace, it's apparent that the other person probably needs to have this information before that. I can't answer those questions, but you know you're the expert on you. So it really, for me, I would have some kind of process of how I disclose this, what that looks like, what stage it happens. You know, do I disclose it to everybody? Am I very specific in terms of these are the absolute things that we're not going to do? I think in actual fact, when you talk about your trauma, you give people quite a lot of power when you do that. So
too much information.
Too much information too soon. You know, I don't necessarily want somebody to know that if they pull a boiled egg out of their pocket, I'll stop.
Versus a whole lot.
It increases your vulnerability. And in actual fact, there's got to be a trusting relationship to start with before I'm prepared to do that. You know, all of these things are things that need to be considered. At what stage do you disclose what part? But it absolutely should be, in terms of what you're saying, it pulls me out. That's okay. That conversation, the sole purpose and function of that conversation is for you to impart that information and then do something nice.
It's not just supposed to turn you on and lead to the next thing. Negotiations aren't always that. They take their time. And I think, again, this comes into immediacy. We can often be too immediate. You said it takes me out of what's happening in the present. I mean, that to me could also mean a flashback, or that could be a real trauma response. So I'm curious, I guess, about what you mean there. Master Jim said use a journal. I love journaling. It can be really clear for people. I'm a big believer in my stupid idea about the Haynes manual for a submissive or for a dominant, which is, it used to be that if you got a bike or a car, you would buy something called a Haynes manual that went with it, would tell you everything about it. It's such a good exercise to write your own Haynes manual about your life, about who you are, about how to handle me in certain situations. And you could have a section on this that somebody could read and partake. But again, still going to go back to Poppy's point, because it's one of my favorite points at the moment, is, do we really need to tell everybody everything in that moment and so much up front? Because although they need to know certain things, we do tend to tell them too much. And it does give away power. We've just met this person, but then potentially, I also find it fascinating that we've just met this person. We're willing to do something very physically, intimately with them, but which does impact our minds as well. So are we going a bit too fast? And that's a question I would definitely ask.
And I think these things are different, aren't they? Ultimately, what we're talking about are what things make us particularly vulnerable. And it's different strokes for different folks. You know, some things that we ought, as a societal or cultural norms will say, should make us vulnerable, absolutely do not elicit any vulnerability in me. And some things that look really, really simple, and people would say, that's first base. No, absolutely not, right? And the reality is we have to know what that looks like for us. And we have to be able to say, okay, I trust myself to be able to set these, set my terms and set my boundaries. And actually sometimes just having a checklist, if I'm going to play quite casually with somebody, I might not disclose all of my trauma, but I might have a checklist of, well, these are the things that really, these are my comfort zone items. These are, we're in fast lane, slow lane. These are the slow lane things. I'm happy to do all of these things on a first meet, but not these. And I had a session with somebody recently, and they had something that they didn't want to do. And I don't actually think it was particularly trauma based. I think it was preference, and not that it mattered. But they were asked 3 times, are you sure? And it was a first meet and a first play. And I was like, is there going to be a second one? Because obviously I don't tell my clients what to do, but if it was me, there would not be a second meeting, after being asked 3 times. So I think we have to have that.
Are you sure?
Sure. Are you sure you don't want to put my dick in your mouth? Sorry if that's explicit. Yeah, I'm sure, actually, I'm sure. But, I think we really...
No, but are you sure?
Yeah, are you sure? I'm really sure. And I think ultimately, there are different levels of communication. And actually, communication can effectively be quite superficial. We've all seen the checklist, we've all seen the what are your preferences. And I think for some of us, if you do have lived experience and you do have trauma and you have absolute no's, they should be on there. But I think also it's important to think about what are the safe, easy, nice spaces. When you're building that psychological safety, you're building that trust, you're building that relationship, what actually do you find it very nice and easy to do? So
How are you? Again, it goes back to values, ethics, morals, and your history and your past and your patterns and who you are. I was talking to an American client I've got yesterday. Was it yesterday? What's today? Thursday. This morning and yesterday morning. I'm not a kinkster. I fundamentally do not identify as a kinkster. I am quite an old-fashioned lifestyler. For me, it's all about authority transference, which used to be power exchange, and kinky sex is part of that in the relationship, which is a very different approach to somebody who really wants the kinky sex. And it takes different levels of connection. Neither are right, neither are wrong. They're just different. I'm not up for casual play. I never have been. That's a fucking lie. I spent years up for casual play, but I didn't realize how much I probably wasn't because my numbers are high. So, and that's from a long time ago. So I think it's really important to work that out about what is it you want from this. Again, we're going back to needs. What is it you actually want to get from this? Is this fun? Is this about authority transference? How does this work? That's important too. And then coffee time, right? To what extent do you think intention should be made clear in negotiation? For example, spanker doing it because they're being playful versus spankies doing it because they're aroused by it. I think we can talk things to death. If we're both getting what we want out of it, that's okay. I think it's when a conflict comes into it. So the couple I was speaking to this morning were doing something. She was bratting and being in a really playful mood. He said, carry on and I'm going to get the cane, which then took it to an authority transference mode, which actually she wasn't out for punishment. She ended up bursting into tears. So it's the conflict there that wasn't right because they weren't on the same wavelength. That's a difficult one, isn't it? What would you say, Poppy?
Well, I think there's a should there as well. And, I'm not a big fan of shoulds, as people who know me know. For me personally, I really want to know what the intention is because I'm a submissive person and I want to know what is motivating the other person and driving the other person in terms of the exchange and the interaction, because that is important to me. Is that important to everybody? No. Does it need to be part of the communication? No, it doesn't. You can have 2 people who are having a good time and their intent's probably very different. But if they're scratching that itch and they go together, like yin and that yang matches, then that's absolutely okay. But again, it's about the misalignment, isn't it? The misalignment of expectation is ultimately the root of all clusterfucks. So
the root of unhappiness, expectation. Fuck me. If people realise that, we'd be so much happier. What were you expecting? Well, what I had in my head.
Yeah. But ultimately, if somebody's intention matters to you to the point that it will spoil it. So if my intention is X, and in actual fact, if the other person's intention is arousal, and I am actually really triggered by arousal, or this play is friendship based, and in actual fact, I don't want you to be aroused, or that is a red line for me, or something I'm not okay with. It indicates intimacy, or it indicates something else. Then that obviously needs further exploration. It depends. For me, I would like to know what the intention is, and it will matter to me what that intention is. For some people, that might not be the case. So, it's about understanding ultimately what drives and motivates this scene, interaction, sex, whatever, to take place. If one person's having sex for an orgasm and the other person's having sex for procreation, you're going to have a big problem, aren't you? And really, this question is just an extension of that example.
I really agree with that. I think they're really, really, really fair points. It doesn't have to matter as long as the intentions don't clash. I think we're both saying a very similar thing. It's when something gets in the way of somebody else being okay. When we go down different roads, if you like. So I think that is important. who's got a different question? Anything to do with psychology, BDSM, communication, relationships, authority transference, sexual issues, anything else, relationships? Because we can always finish a little bit early, but has anyone got anything they would like to finish on to ask? Because often when I put the workshop title out there, people say, but I've got so many questions or so many come up, and this is an opportunity for you to ask. So if you've got a burning question, ask it. If not, we'll start to round up and say goodbye slowly. So we'll see what you say. But I do think journaling is a great thing. The research behind it is massive. Oz. Sometimes I feel a bit inadequate. Interesting, putting those two together. Sometimes I feel inadequate in emotionally supporting my long distance partner. Do you have any tips that might help? I think it's really lovely that you want to. I think it's really important that you do. I think we have to work out what the other person wants, and we need them to actually tell us what it is that they need from us. If it's our need to give to them and we want to do something for them, then again, I go back to something I said earlier. It can be really nice if you're very together and very caring and very in love, it could be that you send them something, it could be you write them something, it could be that you send them something with your smell on or something along those lines in some way, shape or form. That can be really lovely. It could be that you simply turn up one day. That's a really nice surprise. I would never do that to someone like me. I'd fucking hate that if you did that to me.
Oh, last Friday, my mother did that to me. All kinds of trauma.
Yeah, I really, really hate that. But we, yeah. But it's all about, I think we also have to say, what is it you would like? What is it that you want? Because although that can put the mental load, the emotional load on them, the more you get to know them, the less you need to answer that question. It could be doing something as simple as sending them a cinema ticket. It could be something simple as sending them a takeaway, sending them some flowers, sending them something to do, sending them some colouring books, sending them something to make or to be part of. What I would look at as well is, where is your inadequacy coming from? Why is that a problem for you? And why do you feel inadequate? And why do you need to be the person? Because often where we go nowadays is very much these approaches that say, do you want me to listen? Do you want me to fix or give ideas? Am I a sounding board? Like, what is my role in this? And I think that's really important as well, to ask and to be part of, to try and find out what it is that they want from you. And people's needs change at different times, but the key here for me is I feel inadequate in emotionally supporting. What's the right level? What's the tick? It's entirely me telling myself my partner is incredibly supportive and vocal about how they don't feel that I lack at all. So I want to know is, why don't you believe them? So for me, that's something for you to work on more than for them. Why do you feel inadequate? What's going on for you? What do you think this role should be? What does that look like? And I would go and get some, not help, but I would go and talk about that to someone.
And I would also argue, is there a reason why that need's not been met? So ultimately, Deb said exactly what I was saying in terms of the why that comes in front of the inadequacy, and also the how do they want to be emotionally supported. And it sounds like, in actual fact, you are fulfilling in terms of the how, because they seem to be quite happy and fulfilled. But why is that inadequacy in you? And it might also be, you've talked about the relationship in long distance, and I think it's really important to be really honest and transparent. And are there some needs that are not been met in you in relation to the relationship and how it currently operates? And that might be, the root cause of what this inadequacy is. But again, it's about really picking apart your why in terms of what you're describing here, particularly with the add-on you've given it in relation to your partner, and also for me, if that's difficult, what have relationships looked like that feel really emotionally supportive? It doesn't have to be an interpersonal romantic relationship, it could be a friendship, it could be anything, but what kind of relationship have you had where it's felt that there's been really good emotional support both ways, it's been reciprocal and it's functioned well? What's different? Why does this not? And I think that would be a good exercise to do.
What is it you're feeling? Why is it that you need to be the rescuer? Have you been parentified in your growing up? Did you need to care for others? Is that where you feel adequacy and value? Are you more of a human doing than a human being, mixed with a little bit of perfectionism maybe? I don't know you at all. But all these little traits come in and they kind of go together. And It's important. Okay, I've got another couple of questions all of a sudden with 5 minutes to go. Okay. My friend about their partner, I want them to know what I want without me having to tell them. Yeah, no, not going to happen. Like, nobody's a mind reader. It's not. We can all predict the future when it's negative. I talk about this a lot. And like, it's going to fucking go wrong. I fucking hate my life. It's terrible. Okay, take every penny you've got and go and spend it on the lottery. Why won't you? Because you can't predict the future. Don't fucking pick one. We can always predict the future when it's negative. Why can't we when it's positive? Because we can't. And it's really important that, no, it doesn't. One of my horrible, I hate the phrase, it goes without saying. It always goes with saying. It never goes. Like, why do we use that phrase? It goes without saying.
And I think reframing that's really important. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk about it. I think reframing that's really important. I want them to know what I want without me having to tell them. And I think the important part of this is I want to be passive. I want to not have to tell them. I want to not be. I want to be, devoid of the responsibility of agency and autonomy and good communication. And in actual fact, that's key to this. Why do they want to be so passive in that relationship?
Yeah, for sure. I'm a very logical person. I know about sympathising with others. I'm often asked to empathise instead of sympathise. I would ask what both people think they know what the meaning is of either of those. Because we use words. Again, it's about words. Anyway, but unless I have experienced something similar, I have troubles empathising with somebody. Through the book I previously referenced, I actually learned that a lot of things that people call empathising is actually sympathising. There you go, I didn't read that. Predicting, oh, I can tell the future. Fuck me, who wants to put some money on the lottery? Is actually sympathise, because you can only empathise things and feelings that you experienced yourself in the past, the present. Do you agree? How do I empathise in situations where I do not have the same experiences? By listening, by being, by saying, by reflecting back. These are counselling skills, actually, if you're a counsellor or a psychotherapist. Fuck, that sounds awful. Or repeating back what somebody says when they say, just feel so devastated. God, it must be awful to feel so devastated. Simply by being. That's often all we have to do. I mean, if you've done a basic counselling course, it's one of the fundamentals that you're taught, for sure. And I also want to question, I might know what I think empathy and sympathy are, but I want to understand what you think they are, because you might have them wrong as well. I don't know. And even if you haven't got them wrong, what is right for you? What would you say, Poppy?
Well, and I would say that we put a lot of emphasis on the ability to empathise. And in actual fact, I would argue, and Debs might not agree with me here, and other people might not agree with me, but I think in actual fact, if you can effectively communicate and you can listen and you can ask and you can validate accordingly, I think validation is actually far more important than the ability to empathise. And if you can actually communicate and validate, you kind of don't need to empathise, to be very honest with you. And that's my view. That's my answer.
I think it's partly about putting your own preconceptions and ideas aside and allowing yourself to absorb someone else's and say, this may not be my values, they may not be my opinions, but let me take on board theirs for a minute.
Absolutely.
I've also been asked a very sexually based question as well. So I'm going to flip onto that. And thank you for that, Jerry, because I think that's absolutely true as well. So I have issues orgasming with a partner. My clit is fickle-minded and I'm very prone to distraction. What can I do? It's difficult to orgasm by myself too. It takes a long time for me by myself. Your clit is not fickle. It is not prone to distraction. Your mind is. It's not your clit. Your clit does not have feelings. Okay, so this would be quite an extensive answer as well. Have you got anything to say, Poppy?
No, keep going.
Right. Okay, so if you have managed to orgasm before, it is not an orgasm physiological problem, it is a psychological issue. If you have managed to do it, sometimes half of what we do is the pressure we put on ourselves. Sometimes it's finding the right turn on, and sometimes those things can be a bit extreme for us. Sorry, my dog's barking outside. A lot of women only come through clitoral stimulation. However, the clitoris is a really large organ which goes all the way in, all the way around, and all the way back, which is why some women also come from penetration. The bit that we see, all those thousands and thousands of nerve endings, can also be hypersensitive. the way that it protrudes. Some people only like their hood being touched. Some people like the clitoris itself being touched. Some people like symmetrical, asymmetrical circles. It really varies. If you, again, this is really important, if you have managed to do it, it is not a biological problem, it is a psychological problem. If you are putting pressure on yourself to orgasm, one of the best things you can do, rather than just rubbing and staying there for ages and ages, getting quite sore, finding it really difficult, is to stop intentionally. And we work like that with people who are anorgasmic or have dysfunctions of any kind. This is just one technique. Probably haven't got time for a couple of hundred. So, and if this is a serious problem, I would go and see a psychosexual psychotherapist or a sexologist who's completely trained in working with time to orgasm and what that feels like, or anorgasmia, where we don't actually have an orgasm at all. A lot of women don't come at all until they hit their 30s or 40s, till they know their bodies and they know what they want and they know their minds. It's really fucking common. People think it isn't, but it is. Because also I have a writing on, please stop faking it, women. Too many women fake it to placate or to make sure that the person that they're with, regardless of their gender, feel better. It doesn't work and it doesn't help, because then we don't understand ourselves and our own bodies. Take the pressure off. Maybe don't play, don't wank, don't let anybody else masturbate you in any way, shape or form, just for a little while. When you do start, just say, I'm just going to rub and touch for a few seconds until my body physiologically responds. That feels quite nice. I'm getting some warm flutterings and I'm just going to stop and back off. And do that quite a few times so you're building up. As you get more warm, tingly feels, as soon as you find your mind drifting off, take your fingers off and say, right, let's go and do something else. Take all the pressure off. Erectile dysfunction, 99.9% of the time reoccurring, if it is not biological, is pressure. It's the pressure we put on ourselves about how we've got to be, how we've got to perform, and what we think we should be doing. I can't normalize enough how many people have around orgasms, and so many do. And if you're going to, as I say, see someone, psychosexual psychotherapist or a sexologist or somebody, because we have to do 2 years extra to even study this stuff. So this is one of the most basic techniques. Back off. Go to a warm, fuzzy place. Stop. Go, that felt really good. Well done, Lee. I want you to build up positive experiences that you are having with your clitoris and your mind to connect them. Make sure you're really relaxed. If you try and do it and you're trying to knock one out, or you're stressed or you're pressured or you're tired, that doesn't work either, because it adds that extra pressure. If you have been to the doctors, you make sure there's nothing wrong. That's also really important. As I say, if you have an orgasm, it's very unlikely that there is anything physically wrong. So it's really important just to back off, take the pressure off, build up really slowly, enjoy it, have a nice time. That feels nice. Stop. Yay, go me, Deb. Did really well there. I'm really happy with myself. Build up the positive experiences as well. And if you happen to orgasm, fantastic. And if you don't, take the pressure off the orgasm in itself. Feel the nice feels that you're having. Enjoy the stimulation that you're experiencing and start to bring it down a little bit. There are lots of books telling you how to orgasm. There are lots of people out there telling you how to orgasm. There are a lot of people that tell you to breathe. Don't breathe. Do this, use a warm loop, use a flavored loop, always lie down, lie on your front, stand up, use a shower head,
And I think I always defer to you when it comes to the sexual questions, because you are obviously, you have further training than I do when it comes specifically to sexual questions. But I think a lot of this as well is about that distraction. You're saying in actual fact it's really difficult to stay focused, and I wonder how much of that is to do with this being a sensory issue. And for me, looking back now, we talked about earlier on, I identified as having ADHD, and I didn't early on to my career, and I look at a lot of my fetishes and a lot of the things that I like sexually in terms of captivity and sensory deprivation and all of those things that we like when we're attracted to BDSM and kink and certain elements of it. And a lot of it is about that ability to be able to be very, very hyper-focused in one particular area, not to be distracted. And it sounds like perhaps that's worked for you in the past when it's come to clitoral stimulation and orgasm. But I also think there's nothing wrong with if we are, because you're right, it's not the clit, it's the brain, we are distracted. It's all right to say, okay, the sun and moon and stars aren't aligning at the moment. I can't have that orgasm because I'm too preoccupied with X, Y, and Z. I will address that and I will go back to this, but also to have something to focus on. So for me, quite often, for a long time, I used to like insects. I would have that playing on in the background. I would have that, it's all right to be focused on something if that aids you going in the direction of where you want to go to. And to look at, things like sensory deprivation and like you said, building up to, it feels like there's a real kind of focus on the orgasm here.
And if people Come As You Are is a good book. I would agree with that. Coffee and Time. And Cosmopolite, yes, it's really the basic stuff around arousal and desires are really different. So our sexual response cycle, the way it works is we have desire, and desire leads to arousal, but that actually isn't definite in every single human being. And that arousal in theory leads to plateau. And actually, when we are at plateau, that doesn't always mean we're going to reach orgasm. Then we have something called resolution. These things aren't always that way. They are as a standard, which is really dangerous for most of us. And again, if you're looking to the end of what's going to happen, it doesn't always help us. And I don't know if you are neurodiverse. I haven't, or if there's something else going on. And that's all of these things you could work through with the psychosexual psychotherapist to find out. It's really important that you just back off though. And just, if you find your mind wandering, how do you bring it back? I think sensations in the body are really good to start to work on as well. So as you are touching your clitoris, if you feel your mind wandering away, just turn and say, thank you. Let's just come back. What else is going on in my body? Oh, my heart's going a bit faster. My breathing's changing. They are all really good symptoms and signs of how that response cycle of what's happening in your body is changing from desire to arousal. And just to be aware and to sink into what you're actually feeling. But of course, if you have trauma or you have something going on and you're feeling really stressed, that's really complex to do because all the other stuff starts to go, hello, what about me? And that's when sometimes some sensory deprivation or sensory alternatives can come in. For me, it's my mind. It's definitely about my mind. It's my mind that gets me to orgasm every single time. Do I need some physical stimulation? Yes, absolutely. But it's also about what I'm thinking about, what I'm connecting to. But those thoughts aren't just thoughts, they're in my gut too. They're really connected. And I definitely had to teach myself to take less time, and by doing a lot of these things. And there are a lot of things out there that you can look at.
And I think we put a lot of, we go to a lot of effort, don't we? We create scenes, we create situations, we hire spaces, we find time in our busy diaries to get together with a certain person who we're intimate with, or we play with, or we have the right dynamic and the connection with, and we create a really high pressure environment in a lot of what we do a lot of the time. And the reality is sometimes it's not a good time to eat because, I've just eaten, or I'm not hungry, or this is not the time for. And quite often we don't give ourselves permission to be. It's not a good place. It's not a good place to be sexual or to play or to be, this isn't working for me in this moment. That has to be okay. If that's always the case, then obviously that's a greater problem. But I think sometimes it is, my mind's not on this right now. That's kind of okay. And to be in the kind of relationships with ourselves and with other people where that's okay too. I think we do put a lot of pressure. I think a lot of people do when it comes to sex and sexuality, but I think we have the added pressure, is my opinion, when it comes to this stuff quite often.
Yeah, I've had a few occasions where I've booked escorts for sessions. Yeah. By the time they arrive, I'm just not in the mood. Do you mind if I don't do what I had planned, all this great stuff that I wanted to do? Do you mind if we don't? If we just have a chat and a drink and a cuddle?
And that's okay. I think that's okay. And I know lots of people who, are involved in sex work for a living, and I think that's absolutely okay. And you know what? I had a really, really, really fabulous sexual encounter with somebody once, and they did something that had not occurred before. And I jokingly said, "Oh, that's brilliant! What that way that girls joke on? Did you learn that on the front page of Cosmopolitan? I never learned that." And I was like, what happened there? And they said, "Oh, yeah, and I had this experience where I booked a sex worker and I wasn't in the mood for sex, so we just ended up chatting, and they taught me how to do this thing. Isn't it amazing?" And in actual fact, sex workers are really skilled professionals in the art of sex. That's ultimately what they do. So if you're not in the mood for that, have a coffee. I want their knowledge, I want their experience, you can always find something else to do with them. And that's in the context of a sex worker. And I think when we come together for sex and play and scenes and intimacy, again, if it's not plan A, we can always find something else to do. Is it this, is it that? And I think that has to be all right.
As long as you don't feel guilty about it or embarrassed.
Don't self-shame, that's for sure. 10% of women, roughly, AFAB, like women with a vagina, with a clitoris that all works, that's the definition. 10% of women will orgasm fairly easily. Up to 40% of women will have issues around having an orgasm. So I think we need to normalize this. It is a complex thing to have a fucking orgasm as a woman. It's way more complex than the male orgasm, with the messages and the way the body responds and what happens. So actually learning what's happening physiologically in your body can be really good. So it's really common. Please go to a doctor first. Look, if you have managed it, it should be okay, but has anything changed? That's one of the key things I would ask. Are you on antidepressants, SSRIs? Have you done something different? Are you perimenopausal, menopausal? Have you got symptoms of diabetes? Have you got symptoms of hypertension, blood pressure issues? Because all of these things impact orgasm, especially in the female body. Are you tired? Are you stressed? Are you not exercising enough? Are you drinking too much alcohol and or are you taking drugs? Any of these things can impact. And if any of those things have changed, then of course, please go and get checked out first, because that makes a difference. But understanding your body, have a look, research what a female orgasm is, research what the body does, how it responds. Look, do some research for yourself. It's really important that you do. And if it's not medical, there are some things that you can do. You can definitely take a, there is, we don't have it so much in the UK, but it's very much used in America. There is, there is a drug that you take to stop yourself smoking. It sounds like ibuprofen, but it's not.
It's called bupropion.
Thank you very much.
It is available. It's available it is available as a stop smoking medication here.
Yeah. So, and you can go to the doctor, and also some people use Wellbutrin for depression treatment as well. Actually, so that's quite interesting. If you push your doctor, you can also get some screams. You can cream. You can do all sorts of things that stimulate blood flow from things very. I'm not saying put Tiger Balm on your fucking clitoris. I'm not. And you can get all sorts of devices that help you as well. You can do a lot of things that will really help you. You can look at your pelvic floor if you've got a pelvic floor problem, because that's all connected. There are lots of things, as I say, as you can do. However, it really is a talking problem if none of these things work. And 9 times out of 10, it is actually more of a psychological issue. It is about backing off. It really is normalized. I never knew that so many women have this problem. Yeah, up to 40%. And actually, I think we need to normalize it with men as well, and with anyone who's trans or non-binary. It doesn't matter what your gender is, although the research is quite gender specific. If your bits feel like don't work, if you fuck me, we should be talking about this stuff, but we don't. And this is why I have such a problem with women lying, which is, and men lying actually. People, doesn't matter. Again, gender doesn't matter. Why say? Because actually you set it up for the next person so badly. Well, all the people I've slept with have always managed to orgasm. No, they probably just lied to you.
I told a gynecologist off recently because I went for my post-operative checkup. So for anyone who knows me or follows me will know I had a hysterectomy recently. And I went for a checkup. And the question was, you know, ultimately all around sex and intercourse and P&V, and have you managed to achieve? Not once did I get asked whether I'd had an orgasm or whether I'd enjoyed anything. Are you capable of the act of? Absolutely. You know, the orgasm didn't feature in that conversation at all.
Your husband have a good time, Simon.
Your husband have a good time. No. But it's that attitude, isn't it? We don't talk about this stuff, and we don't even talk about this stuff in very targeted, specific appointments where we should be talking about this stuff, let alone outside of those, you know, arenas. So it is interesting in that, you know, 40% is a lot. It's a big old number.
I mean, it's like all research varies. It's anywhere between sort of like 32 to 48. So it's somewhere in the middle. It's around 40%. So, and that's where it goes. It's really important that we work this shit out, I think, anyway. And we need to talk about it. We need to say that it's normal. We need to understand that it's really normal. I think we also need to research. Have a look into the physiology of your own body. Have a look. And then look at the options. And don't just go for traditional, I'm going to use this stimulant, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Go and talk to someone. Go and get the help that you need. That's what we need to do. Right. Thank you very much. Thank you for the lovely comments. Thank you to both of us. It's been incredibly interesting. I like these because they also test my brain. Do they test yours as well, Poppy? What's it been like?
Yeah, no, I like a Q&A. I always get less pressure doing a Q&A, whereas I think when we do like one particular topic, I feel really pressured to know absolutely everything.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I would be a GP rather than a consultant. So I quite like I quite like Q&As, to be honest.
Well, I think it would be good in December, the first week of December. I think we should talk about holiday survival, how to keep polyamory, BDSM, and those relationships and different things. We kind of do it every Christmas alive, how to help each other, especially if you're doing different things, what that will look like. So we'll be doing, because we're not just talking about Christmas, there's so many holidays that are really important in every religious calendar, is how to survive those and how to manage and what we can do. So next time for December, the first Thursday of December, we'll be doing how to survive holidays, how to keep relationships going if you're separated, how to slip off for a bit of a kinky bit of fun if that's what you need, or how to fucking escape your own family, how to hold boundaries, how to maybe spend less money, all of those things that create stress and pressure, which influence us sexually, relationship-wise, and everything else as well. Honestly, the quality is so high and so stimulating. I love the diversity of topics. This is so valuable. Oh, thank you very much. We'll do them. Well, maybe we'll do every other one. How about that? Every other one is a Q&A, and then we get a specific subject if wanted. Poor old David is napping. He must be exhausted from his trip abroad and come back. God, I didn't think I was that boring, or you? But still.
Honestly, oh.
Oh, all of your workshops are like this. Gosh, thank you. We really appreciate that. I'm sure Poppy does too. So again, spread the word, get people coming if you want. Love it when you do. So we will do the holidays, surviving holiday and or religious times and times that we are with our families next time, especially maybe if you are having an affair or you are poly and you have to be with one person or you're not out, or all of those things we'll look through and we'll work with next time. So do that.
Speak to you soon.
Bye. Night, night, David.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bless them.
Bye.
Recording stop.